Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Brand Innovators Livecast. I'm your friendly neighborhood chief content officer here at Brand Innovators, David Teicher. We have a fantastic program today presented by our friends at Tremor Video. We have some amazing speakers we're going to be bringing in, covering all things future of media. We're going to be talking about TV. We're going to be talking about digital video. We're going to be hearing from our community members and senior marketing leaders from brands like Wells Fargo, Home Advisor, AT&T, SC Johnson, and more. A couple of housekeeping notes before we kick off in just a second. First off, if you are going to be tweeting along with our program today or posting on LinkedIn, we use the hashtag BILivecast, and we certainly encourage all that fun social conversation. You can use the in-Zoom widgets and tools to engage with your fellow attendees, to ask questions to our speakers. So we highly encourage both of those things, right? It's always fun to talk to your fellow attendees, and we always allocate time on the tail end of our fireside chats for audience questions. So please keep those coming. They've been great. With that, I would like to quickly tee up a little bit of a fun sizzle reel for you guys that should give you a good idea of what we've been up to the last few months. Every single person on our team, from the top down, from the bottom up, everybody stepped up.
You've been with us since the beginnings. We're going to keep the ball rolling. We have two more amazing speakers.
We were going to launch our very first virtual event, which we called the Livecasts. Historically, Brand Innovators has been a real-world events-based organization. We would go around the country, every major market, hosted by major brands, Fortune 500 companies. We would bring our community members together in the real world at those events to share with each other and learn from one another. It became obvious in March, like many other brands, we had to rethink our entire model.
We're really excited to kick this off and to welcome Angela.
Joining as our moderator, Alex Belady.
I'm really happy to be here with Steve Kennedy today.
They've continued the momentum all the way through this time that we've all been unfortunately stuck inside during the pandemic.
It feels like a family, it feels like a community.
Just got married 2 days ago.
Congratulations.
It's been an honor to be part of the virtual stage.
Thanks so much to Brand Innovators for having me here today.
Learning from them and being part of a community was really great. So thank you, Brand Innovators.
We've had 112 live casts, 150 private virtual roundtables. Between those two, 1,200 senior brand marketers from all sorts of amazing brands in our community, and all the amazing brand marketers, all of our fantastic partners and sponsors.
I found the experience exciting, thoughtful, inspirational.
I look forward to when we're back in person, but until then, this has worked very well.
If you haven't attended, you should, and you should bring your team with you.
I'm going to be a marketer for the rest of my life.
This is great, Chris. I love it, bro.
Full creative power, and they're like, you know what, you know best, you do you.
How is working from home going for you?
It's probably driving my wife crazy.
Fantastic job moderating. This is really wonderful. Thank you all.
Well, that is great. I cannot believe it's been almost a year since we launched our virtual programming, the Brand Innovators Livecast. So big shout out to the team here and our community, you guys, for supporting us along the way. It's been a crazy roller coaster, but we are thrilled to be here today with you guys. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speakers for today's program. We have Allison Gensheimer, the VP of Digital Marketing and Head of Media Platforms and Innovation at Wells Fargo, and our moderator, Kent Wen, the Director of Sales for the West for Tremor Video. So Kent and Allison, welcome. How are you guys?
Good. How are you?
I am good. Thank you so much for being here. We can hear you. We can see you. Kent, can you hear us? Can you see us? I think you're on mute still.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, the virtual stage, I will turn over to you guys, and I'll be back in a little bit to wind things down. So Kent, it's all yours. Take it away.
Thanks, David. Hey, Allison, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. I'm excited to be sitting down with you here today. I think that this is a really interesting time, this time period that we're in right now. You and I connected previously, and we chatted a little bit about kind of the pandemic and how it's affected the marketing strategy that you've had and media strategy. I think that particularly right now, we're about a year in, and
Unreal.
the year has created a lot of change for us as marketers and us as consumers too. I think that I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the changes that you've had to make from your media and marketing strategy over the past year. And now that we're kind of getting some of the positive and uplifting news about the vaccines and things opening up a little bit more, what your outlook is like for the rest of the years. So what are some of those changes that you'll be carrying through? Just your overall thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first, it's fun to be here, and it was so cool to see that full brand innovators intro was kind of cool. I was like, I know some of those people, and just how much we've had to shift to a virtual community.
Right.
Who know? We all kind of were prepared for it, but we weren't prepared for it. And I think as in the media space, going through the pandemic was kind of a jolting experience, right? I mean, we're still in it, but just all of a sudden one day it all changed. And we all had to operate differently, and it's bizarre. But I think as we look forward, obviously media consumption has changed. The way consumers want to engage with media, want to engage with brands, everything from how they consume media to how they use our products. Digital banking went crazy, which totally made sense. And we all had to teach our parents how to deposit checks and get money in their phone, I remember, all those kinds of fun things. But we also saw this amazing adoption of OTT, CTV, things that our teams have been watching for years. And much like for those of you who go back to when is mobile going to take off, or this is going to be the year of mobile. I mean, it was 10 years that it was the year of mobile. And now we're looking at the last 3 years have been when is the CTV thing gonna be a deal? We tested some things early on. I even remember trying to launch campaigns and having big providers be like, no, don't do it that way, and stop campaigns. And you're going, are you crazy? But now it's consuming a lot of what we do, and we're spending a lot of our time trying to figure out not only what are the new channels, how to use them, what is the consumer behavior in these channels? Is it different? Is it the same? Can we treat it the same?
Right.
And how do we measure it? It's more like it's the year of devices than the year of connected TV or anything. It's
right.
Looking at something just early this morning and was trying to think through, okay, can I even do cross screen? Is connected TV the same as TV? Not from an advertising, we could sit here and talk about advertising all day long, but from a consumer experience, aren't they just the same thing? Why are we treating them differently? So those are all the ideas and thoughts that we're kind of playing with as we see just the change in consumer behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen a lot of accelerated growth within the CTV space, which is exciting, but I think that it also presents some challenges as to kind of to your point, how do we connect everything together? And oftentimes we get in this kind of tunnel vision of marketers, and we forget that there is also a consumer on the other end of it. And to your point, from a TV standpoint, consumers are probably seeing it just as TV. They're accessing content just through a different way. From as marketers, how do we kind of balance the two, right? How do we leverage the addressability of it and understand the measurement side of it, but all at the same time also recognize that it's still a TV, and it's still a little bit of a passive experience. So with that, how has with CTV, what kind of role would you say that it takes in your media marketing plan, and how do you view it for Wells Fargo?
Well, I mean, I think that's the question we have to figure out, right? And we have to kind of test into and understand, is it really broadcast TV? I mean, it's got a mass reach, but it's targetable. Well, for now, next release from who, that's going to make it not targetable or measurable.
Yeah,
it's a targetable channel. It's a TV experience. We're trying to figure that out. Do you treat it like television? Is it mass market? Is it mass reach? Or do you go more targetable? And if you go more targetable, can you measure it? Do you change the creative? I think that's a conversation we have a lot. Creative seems to trail everything else, right? It seems to trail audience targeting. It seems to trail measurement. And then we get these really highly targeting audiences that are amazing. Everyone gets really excited about. And then we serve them all the same creative.
Right.
Why did we target them again? Why did we do all that hard work and pay the premium and do all that stuff if we were going to serve them the same creative? But I think those are all the things everybody has to work out. And I think we have to really pause for a moment and treat it like a new channel.
Yeah.
All those questions and not make the assumptions that we made. I mean, go back to when mobile became big, right? Everyone tried to treat it like display.
Right.
And it didn't work. And everyone's like, mobile didn't work. And it's like, well, yeah, because you're treating it like a display channel. It's not a display channel. It's different. The user is on the go. I always laugh about, I remember running a campaign for a company in mobile many, many moons ago. And it was a mobile campaign where the call to action was in subways. At that time, you couldn't get mobile or cellular technology in a subway. So like, okay, so I'm in a subway car and I'm running a mobile campaign. Everyone let's think about this for a minute. But I mean, that's kind of how we're looking at it, is we've got to treat it like a new channel. We've got to try to understand it. We've got to understand its mix in media. We got to figure out how to measure it and understand, should the creative be different?
Yeah, the creative piece is interesting. I think that at Tremor, we focus a lot on creative because data and media get a lot of attention.
Mm-hmm. It's easy.
It's easy, but creative is a very important part of that. And I think that with certain brands, it's whether it's a lack of resources or bandwidth or just kind of streamlining the media plan, creative oftentimes gets left out. But some of the creative testing that we've done with some of our partners, we've seen that just a customization of, a simple overlay kind of
right,
urging someone to do something or speaking to them in an iterative way has been quite effective, especially even on the CTV space, and especially even when we're looking at CTV from a performance standpoint, the action that we're able to drive and how we're able to see what consumers are doing after the ad exposure, we're seeing some really positive results from a custom creative. And it could be as simple as, like I mentioned, an overlay, or it could be something as sophisticated as a DCO campaign where we're optimizing towards the audience and the data. That's something that we've been investing quite heavily in.
Interesting.
So it's good to see that, you're kind of thinking that way. And it's especially for a brand as big as Wells Fargo with various lines of business and audiences and products, that it's important to kind of think about creative. How are you guys approaching that with I guess this ties into the question of some of the privacy conversations that are happening and some kind of like the cookie deprecation, right? And so our ability that might have an impact on creative. What are kind of how are you approaching that?
Cautiously. We've spent, I have an absolutely brilliant team. And about 2 years ago, they all kind of went, kind of, Houston, we have a problem. Like, the world's going to change and we need to be ahead of it and prepared for it and understand it and make some predictions and see what happens. And so, as far away as like 2017, when Safari ITP first started to come out, we started thinking about, what is this going to be? Who do we need to be? We didn't have a date. No one knew about this concept of, Chromageddon come 2022 isn't really there, but we're kind of like, we need to start thinking about what this world without cookies and consumer privacy, is about. I thought it was super interesting what Google released yesterday.
Right.
And, everybody kind of went, whoa, oh my God. But if you read what they're saying, it's kind of interesting. The consumer wants privacy. We created this monster. It's our fault. So we have to take responsibility for it, which means we also get to be part of the solution, which to me is the coolest part of the whole thing. But consumers don't understand the internet, and they don't have to. It's not their responsibility to know it the way I know it. I was talking to somebody else, like, I drive my car every day, but I could not explain to you how well it works, nor is it my responsibility to do so. But we have an assumption that consumers should know that much about the internet. And I don't know why we want it to be that way. They deserve some sense of privacy. Everybody does. My husband will always laugh at me and he says, who thinks they're private on the internet? Like, give it up. You're out there, your kids' pictures on Facebook and you think you have a right to privacy. Didn't you kind of give that up when you put it in front of billions of people across the world? But I think it's a learning curve our consumers have to go through, and we have to be respective of the learning curve more than anything.
Yeah.
And what are they comfortable sharing? You know, I've always been a little skeptical of the email share. While I get it in concept, you know, it does make sense. Hi, I'm a user. I'm agreeing to share my email with you for certain use cases. That makes sense. But is the user prepared to make that statement? Do they have enough information? Do they understand the industry well enough to say that?
Yeah.
All these things are going to affect what we're able to do. You know,
I think there's still a lot of unknowns, right? Especially like there was conversation around the unified ID, and then Google made the announcement yesterday that kind
basically said that was cute.
Right.
We're not going to play.
Yeah. So things are constantly changing, and there's still a lot of unknowns, right? So how, as an organization, as as ahead of the kind of the platforms and innovation, how are you guys moving forward with so many unknown variables when it comes to channel strategy? For instance, shifting into a CTV space where it's more reliant on user registration data, et cetera, whatnot, or from a creative standpoint, are you streamlining it and doing fewer iterations, doing iterations based on interest groups that kind of Google had mentioned? How are you moving forward with so little information and information that is changing constantly?
Like I said, very cautiously. We kind of have made, about a year ago, we made some big bets, and we keep a close eye on them. You know, we made a big bet that media and data partners were going to matter, and who we worked with was going to matter. And we needed to start evaluating them differently than just their CPM, or we had to start looking at what kind of data they had. What is the durability of the data they have? Who are they partnering with? Does it meet our needs? Does their roadmap for the next 2 years meet our needs? So we kind of started looking at our partners and being a little bit more selective, so that we were picking partners that we knew were going to be on for the long haul, and weren't testing into partners that were like, that worked for one campaign, but it's not reusable.
Right.
I would say we probably haven't made as many strides on the creative side. Probably because, when I see media plans and the campaign launch process, it's like the creative process is so long, and it kind of is, it's so much longer than the campaign process, really. Give us a target audience, we can put the campaign, but the creative process is a much longer process, especially when you take into account privacy, especially in a highly regulated industry like financial services, where there's a lot of things we have to care for in a very small space. And so what I think is creative lags behind a lot of those things. We figure out the audience, we figure out the targeting. We're like, okay, then what creative actually got approved? And we'll try to piece it in to the media plan the best we can. Something's got to be done there, but I think it's more organizational than something technology can solve. DCOs are very cool tools, and we're dipping our toe into that space. Financial services has not historically been a big DCO place, but we're trying to think about the technology differently and leverage it as a solution to make creative iterations more seamless, more operationally efficient. I kind of have encouraged people, don't think about it as like the travel campaign where you went to the site and you searched some things on Hawaii, and now you have travel ads about Hawaii and dynamic pricing all over the place. Think of it more like, how could I produce creative faster? How can I make creative more relevant to the user without having to produce 5, 10 versions? And can we use that type of technology? The hard thing is if audience targeting, if the data erodes the way we're seeing it, and the tracking erodes the way we're seeing it, you go back to the same problem. I can't target audiences, I can't measurement. Why am I creating all these creative iterations?
Right.
Why am I doing all that? You asked a little bit earlier, we said media and data partners matter. We made some big bets around data. We made some big bets around, and with a really big focus on flexibility and control. We need our first party data. We are one of those lucky companies with a lot of first party data, and we know it. We have a site and an app that our users come to for their services, and we have a lot of responsibility around that. It's not just for us fun marketers. We're like, cool, we have first party data. Like, there's a lot of responsibility. Our privacy lawyer is my best friend. I talk to her on a regular basis, those kinds of things. So I think, to your earlier point, what's changed is we're having a lot more conversations about our partners. We're having a lot more conversations about first party data and how we have access to that data in a flexible and durable way. Durability is a big part of what we talk about. And we've got friends in legal specifically around privacy that we may have talked to when we needed to, that now we talk to on a very regular basis.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of it is just, it's very operational. And from an infrastructure standpoint, setting that up, even before you get to the point of media and marketing and channel mix and all that stuff, we need to kind of figure out what's the infrastructure that we have in place that will kind of weather a lot of the storms that are coming our way with regards to the changes in the cookie deprecation and how we're tracking users and the privacy concerns. Yeah, I think it's a very kind of, it's an interesting time, as I mentioned, you know, especially with the pandemic and now with all the news of kind of privacy, to be in this space and to think about how we are going to create connections with our consumers.
Well, and yeah, it's so many thoughts, like just how we do creative. Like when I watch TV now and I don't see someone with a mask on, I'm kind of like,
Right.
I kind of, you could pause for a minute and you're like, shouldn't they have a mask? Shouldn't they be social distancing? You know, it's like how relevant creative needs to be. I thought those ads that came out right when the pandemic that showed everybody on Zoom and showed everybody on their phones and like all these conference calls were really great because they hit the moment.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember when we were going through the creative process during the pandemic, there were ads that were stopped by senior leaders because they were like, I don't think there's enough social distancing in there. I don't think there's enough mask wearing. Like how that became part of advertising in and of itself. They're going to write, well, they probably won't write books anymore, but you know, they're going to write and do documentaries on this time, you know, that our kids will see. And advertise, it'll be interesting to see what they say about advertising in 20, 30 years and how advertising evolved during, you know, this once in 100, 200 year experience that we're all going through.
Yeah. And then on top of that, layering on kind of the tech changes.
Well, yeah. And then in the middle of that, we decided to erode the one data source that digital technology leveraged to do basically anything.
Right.
But I mean, I get it. You know, we write a lot of decks. I think the biggest thing for us, those of us who live and breathe advertising technology, those of us who live and breathe marketing technology, I think the biggest thing that we are faced with in our internal organizations right now is educating other marketers that things are different and different's okay, and we're going to have to shift. Right. You know, we could do or we're close to doing a year ago is not possible. And it's not possible because it's not possible because we, Wells Fargo, internally are behind or didn't figure something out. It's not possible because the infrastructure and the ecosystem that we operate in to deliver ads has fundamentally changed based on consumer behavior and consumer demands for privacy and how everybody has reacted to that. So we're having a lot of conversations saying, I know you guys, we were close to tactic level multi-channel conversion. It was awesome. Give it up. It's going to look different. It's not like it's not going to be worse because worse is not a thing. It's going to be different. And we have to start. Yeah. And I find that my marketing partners get so lost in the technology around that conversation, and they pick up on like the wrong things, like the platforms, rather than picking up and helping me understand how do I communicate this to you? How do I help you? How do I translate your business needs? Have they changed into the solutions we need to bring forward?
Right.
And we have a lot of time trying not to make this complicated.
Yeah, I think that's, you bring up a good point. For us, the conversation really has been around kind of like, here's our thinking around this, right? And here's how we are kind of transforming our business to be, so that we can be agile in a very, you know, not tumultuous, but ever-changing kind of environment. And so nobody has all the answers, right? Because it could change at any moment. But a big part of what we've been doing is just making sure that our partners have visibility into what we're doing from a product standpoint and how we are adapting and how we are putting measures in place to be a little bit more agile.
I think the important thing is you can't give up and throw in the towel. I've had a couple advertisers say they're just going to wait. We'll just wait, figure out, we'll let everybody else deal with it. And it's like, okay, you're going to be in a bad spot. And then I've heard some advertisers that just say, well, we can't control Google. We can't, We can't control Apple. Like, and they kind of just throw in the towel. And, I can understand that it's a very defeating position, right? And both of those are very natural reactions to big, very confusing changes. I think we have a we have not a responsibility, we have an opportunity to be part of it.
Right.
Conversations like this, joining things like the W3C, getting into, my team members are in like crazy blogs coming up with stuff like, what's flock? What is that? Do we need to understand it? But really a desire to be part of the solution, be part of the industry change and participate in it. It's going to help all. The more the voices we have from our point of views to come up with a solution. I don't want to go through this again in 10 years.
Right.
It's kind of like when we joined here, the first thing we did was replace our ad server, and I don't want to do that again. I don't want to do this again either. So could we get it right, or at least sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. If you wait, by the time you wait, it's too late. And at least everyone can be involved in the conversation now and have different points of view as to the impact of certain solutions. So I think that's a great point. So Allison, I know that we're coming up on time a little bit here. So we'll take a few minutes for a Q&A.
Cool.
So one of the questions here are there any brands in market whose campaigns you've been impressed by this past year?
Oh, wow, that's such a hard question. I'm trying to remember.
This past year has been a little bit of a blur.
It is, it kind of is. And I hate to not answer the question because there is some ads that you just kind of step back and go, wow. How they did that. I think rather than saying brand specifically, I think I'd probably talk a little bit about like the ads that did it well, that really embraced quickly the experience the users were having.
Right.
Some people ran from advertising, and some people really kind of, I'm trying to remember those brands that got out in front with like the Zoom calls and the home experience and the kids running around and the dogs and all that kind of stuff. I think
the travel industry has
really accurately portrayed that experience, stood out.
Right. Yeah, I think that, for instance, the travel industry, in my opinion, has done a good job about that, because there was a flux as to like, are people traveling? How do we make people feel safe? With some of the hotel chains and their kind of precautions and stuff like that. They were quick to market. Some obviously travel brands kind of pulled back a little bit, but others were out there saying, given the right state and given the right regulations, here's kind of the precautions that we're taking.
Well, you bring that up and you bring up Viking Cruise Lines. I don't know. I watched PBS. Yes, I love PBS and Masterpiece Theater. I have since I was a child. And Viking has put out some ads recently that are super interesting where, it is their CEO saying, we can't travel right now. Like, we can't serve you. And they created a whole online portal where you could basically go on a vacation online. I thought that was kind of cool, right? Like just this idea of my way of servicing you is something I can't give you right now. So I'm going to try to figure out how I can continue to service you during this period of time, even though it's going to look a lot different. That was pretty innovative, and how they approach that.
And it helps them keep the conversation going.
It gives them a reason to talk to somebody, and they're empathetic. They're not pretending like it's not going on.
Right.
They realize their followers can't get on a boat, and go down the Danube. Like, that's not happening.
Right. I think we have time for one more question. What can heritage brands learn from newer digital-first brands when it comes to authentically marketing to Gen Z?
Oh God, I love that question. I think one of the things our former CMO and our leadership now bring up a lot is looking towards those brands that, we're in financial services. We can't just look at financial services brands. We don't dictate the customer experience. The customer experience is online. So customers who are big Amazon expect an Amazon-like experience. They expect a Facebook-like experience. They expect a digital experience, coming up and showing up as an older company. I mean, Viking is a really good example. They could have sent everybody a bunch of mailers and a booklet, but they didn't, right? They created a digital online portal. They're an old brand, as I think we we need to look at what the customer experience is for what it is, what they're doing in their daily lives, how they're engaging with technology, and not sit in our industrial silos and say, well, I'm financial services, I'm only going to look at what other financial services companies doing. That doesn't create that's not my experience as a consumer. I bought something on Amazon this morning. You know, I picked up my phone, I needed something, I ordered it really quickly and moved on. As a brand, I think we have to think about like, how is their banking experience similar? How can we make that? The hard part, I think, that the change in the industry is going to have for us is the inability to deliver the level of relevancy and that we've had, and it's going to be a real challenge to build that back. And I worry that consumers are going to hold it against us, not with full knowledge as to why it's happening. And then I also worry that they won't notice, which means we weren't doing a good job in the first place. We maybe need to rethink that for a minute. It's kind of my other side of it. It's like, what if they don't notice?
Right.
What are we doing? Calling my job into question. But that's something that we need to meet the user where they are.
Yeah. I think as marketers, we're like kind of acutely aware of the strategies or the tactics that when we see
right.
And we forget that sometimes maybe a consumer doesn't necessarily see that.
Yeah, why not?
I think you brought up a really good point in terms of, our expectations from the media if we're not able to be as granular from our targeting standpoint. From a measurement standpoint, are you guys, as Wells Fargo and the ecosystem that you're building from a measurement standpoint, pulling back a little bit on kind of the KPIs or the more granular or direct response type KPIs?
Not yet. I think we're still potentially trying to see what we can create. I think the proof's going to be in the pudding as we start to understand. And if we go in eyes wide open and say, okay, we're going to try to report on this. We don't have cookies anymore. We don't have this. How does the KPI look different? It goes back to that marketer kind of point, is spending a lot of time with our we've got a lot of products. We've got a lot of marketers in this organization that are trying to drive forward their goals and objectives, having those conversations with them and being just super transparent, but not complicated. It can't sound like, mad science. It can't sound like, rocket science. We got to talk to them in language they understand, and help them help us to figure out how we build those solutions for our marketers that we serve internally.
That makes sense. Actually, we have time for a couple more questions.
Okay.
Another question here I love, especially when we're talking about different channels and the emerging channels, is how do you approach emerging media channels and how do they factor into your overall strategy? So with that, also, I'd like to add a kind of, especially if you're not able to measure it completely, how do you still test it or get the organization to want to test it?
We do a lot of inside sales. I know that sounds kind of strange, but we always have our eye out for emerging channels. We have what we call an innovation agenda that one of its pillars is emerging channels and trying to identify early on channels that might need a little bit more love to get off the ground and might need a little bit more understanding. I would say our first approach is to approach everything operationally. Can we do it? Can we do the audience targeting? Can we do the measurement? What does it look like? And not immediately go for performance. Because if you do it poorly, it's going to perform poorly. But does that really reflect on the channel? Just you didn't know how to do it yet. So we kind of our first approach is usually, can we do it? Can we send the creative? What does the creative look like? What does the audience targeting look like? What does the measurement look like? How do we traffic it? Can we get it off the ground and going? And what did it take to do that? Was it a Herculean effort or was it relatively seamless and easy? Once we did that, then we can start saying, okay, how does it perform? Did we do it right? So I think our approach is eyes wide open, always test. Testing is important, but you can't test. People have a tendency to test into these hard, like, did it drive incremental reach, blah, 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 blah on day one. Let me just dispel the myth for you. No, you don't test to answer that question. The idea is you got to kind of go through the motions of Did I follow? Did I do it? How did it work? And question all of it, not just did it perform, because you served them the wrong creative. Maybe you put in too tight of an audience and it wasn't right for the channel. So eyes wide open, try it. Don't be so critical out of the gate of performance. I mean, go back to search marketing, right? If we didn't, if all campaigns ran like search marketing, we would turn everything off in 10 days. Right? Search doesn't work on day 1. It doesn't work on day 10. It works on day 30. And it takes months for those algorithms to catch up and you to catch up with them to figure out what kind of conversion events and audience targeting you want. You have to give the emerging channels the same opportunity to be successful.
So do you keep on testing?
Yes.
The same channel? And you just kind of change parameters a little bit?
Change it. What worked? That creative sucked. Don't do that again. Well, we can't. I mean, I remember we first got the DMP, I'll tell you the short story. And we were like, oh, cool, we can do audience targeting. Let's put it all into programmatic PMPs. It didn't work. No, it wasn't because the DMP didn't work, and it wasn't because programmatic PMPs didn't work. Both of those things were very good, but putting really highly targeted advertising into a highly targeted inventory source didn't work. So we changed our approach. Both the DMP and PMP still work and they deliver a lot of value, but together they weren't the strongest performer for us. And so we keep going.
Hey, sorry, I think I'm back. My internet.
Okay, yeah, you know, I was like, what happened?
Yeah, I got the note saying it was a little unstable. Let's see here. We probably have time for one more question.
Cool.
How do you promote authenticity within your purpose-driven marketing strategies?
Oh, I'm the way wrong person to ask about that. Not because I don't believe in it, but because we have very smart people in other parts of our organization that drive that part of the conversation. I think what I will say, just in my opinion, from seeing what we've done, especially around food bank during the last part of the pandemic, those were Wells Fargo volunteers. Those were people who truly cared. Those were Wells Fargo locations. And I think you have to, in order to be authentic, you have to be real. And that's that's an important part of it, but there are much smarter marketers at Wells Fargo that come up with those strategies than me that could answer that question 10 times better.
Awesome. Well, I think we're at time right now.
Yeah, this has been fantastic, guys. Kent, thank you so much for leading the discussion, and Allison, like, super insightful. This is, as you guys are saying, it's such an exciting time, a crazy time, right? With everything that you guys have been talking about, the death of the cookie, the war between Apple and Facebook with regards to data and privacy. And, it really makes for interesting times. I was just having a conversation with somebody about, that value exchange, right? To your point earlier, Allison, right? Your data is out there. People are willing to give you their data if you can clearly articulate, well, what's happening with it and what are we going to give you in return from it? And I think that's kind of the piece of the puzzle that is missing. But people have proved they're willing to use their data as currency if they're getting something back from it. And on the flip side, with everything else, it'll be interesting to see if some of these changes spark more innovation or creativity. With certain, advertisers that maybe are over-reliant on data and things like that, right? And kind of shift a little bit back. But, as always, these kind of changes always spark innovation. So it'll be fun to see what happens, at least from our outsider perspective. But this was so great and so insightful. So thank you again, Kent, and thank you, Allison, for sharing with us and educating our community.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. I love these conversations. Anybody wants to chat, let me know. It's fun. I love talking about this stuff.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to have you both back again soon, because again, there's going to be lots more to talk about, and there is. So we'll have you back again soon. And with that, I think we're going to keep the show rolling today. So thank you both again very much. All right. So again, that was Allison, that was Kent, that was amazing. We now have Gabrielle Meister, the Senior Director of Creative Solutions at Tremor Video, and our very own Jason Edelman, the Vice President of Brand Strategy and Partnership Development at what was called Brand Innovators Labs up until today, which we are relaunching as Brand Innovators Member Services, a very robust group within our organization here. They are deeply embedded within the organizations of lots of our community members and help us learn more about what brand marketers are seeing, what their needs are, what their challenges are, and helping them address that. So, Jason brings a great perspective to the conversation here. So we're thrilled, Gabriella, Jason, we're excited to have you both to keep today's conversations rolling. So with that, you are both on mute. And I'm going to say, Gabriella, the floor is yours, and I will be back a little bit when the conversation winds down.
Thank you, David.
Of course.
Thanks for the intro. And I appreciate the invite to helping lead this conversation on behalf of Brand Innovators. Good morning, everyone, or if you're on the East Coast, good afternoon. I'm Jason Edelman. I lead West Coast operations for Brand Innovators Internal Consulting and Brand Advisory Group. And I am pleased to have Gabby with me here today to have a discussion about the advancements in connected TV. No mystery here, but it's the talk of the town. Connected TV is said to surpass 212 million viewers this year. So it's no longer a nice to have, but it's a must have part of a brand's marketing mix. For the audience listening in, I'd like to tell you about the journey we're going to go on together here for the next about 30 minutes or so. You can expect our conversation to cover advances in new creative tools, the importance of using rich data to influence brand creative, and how both challenger brands as well as legacy brands should be strategically approaching connected TV to maximize creative and contextual relevance. So in a simplified way to describe it, connected TV offers advertisers a non-skippable premium video viewing environment to reach targeted audiences through the landscape of television. And at Tremor Video, you're essentially, Gabby, curating audience data sets and helping brands deliver the most impactful video campaigns and multi-screen interactions to their most relevant audiences. And it's a big week at Tremor. So there's a lot going on. First, I understand your website is being nominated for an award. I don't know if you want to talk about that or not, but just being nominated, I think, is phenomenal. And then just this week, your company announced the expansion of your creative services team with the launch of Truly, which is a partnership with Unruly. So you've been with the organization for 6 of the company's 15 years. If you can briefly tell us about your role, how it fits within the broader organization, and what Truly's Creative Hub is all about.
Amazing. Thank you for that intro, Jason. I'm super excited to be here. Thanks again for having me. So I'm the Senior Director of Creative Solutions, which is already a mouthful when you get an introduction like you just said to Tremor and Truly. I'll start really simple. So Creative Solutions and what we do on my team is really about focusing on what our clients or marketers' challenges and goals are, and then figuring out how can we help them optimize their creative or even develop new creative in order to achieve the campaign goals they set out to do. With Truly and kind of partnering, kind of bringing both the strengths of Tremor and Unruly and creative under one roof with the Truly Creative Studio, we've really been able to kind of pull in and see from a very unique vantage point, not just the marketer side, but as well as the supply side. And essentially, something I really like that Allison mentioned in the previous panel was kind of that convergence of kind of understanding more beyond than just who you're working with directly, who your audience is, who your consumer is. So it truly, really what we like to focus on is that convergence of really marrying data and creative together, especially since it's a gap we continue to see both across, media folks, creative folks, and the like.
Yeah, and I know that the getting into the data part of our conversation is kind of what I'm going to call us the meat of this conversation, but also where you, I think, called it the bread and butter of Tremor, right? Where the rubber hits the road, where data meets creative. Want to talk to you about how important is adopting, though, a flexible approach to creativity and storytelling What are some of the new creative solutions you're seeing that have been grown in popularity over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think especially last year kind of proved that first bit of the question, like being able to be flexible and kind of listening to your client's needs. And I think that especially because people had to focus and pivot their messaging on the fly, you need to be able to have solutions in place that are as flexible as you can. So, you mentioned our Creative Hub or our website, like we offer different solutions, not just, when you're trying to activate, but you can essentially work with us in any different way, whether it's, before a campaign, you're planning your next year, you really just want to learn a bit about CTV like we're doing here. We can kind of cover all those bases. But kind of going back to flexibility, each marketer has different challenges. Each marketer has different goals. So the fact that you need to be able to be flexible to run with it at the same time, knowing that things like a pandemic can kind of throw consumer behaviors for a whirl, and being able to really hit the ground running when you see opportunities. And then the second part, kind of seeing where the popularity has been. It's funny to see, or really interesting to see the evolution of kind of commonplace things that have kind of come back. So you'll see the evolution of shoppable video and kind of how that has evolved the last few years. And especially bringing it to CTV.
Has QR codes been a part of that? Has that taken off yet? What's the consumer adoption there?
Oh, that's great that you mentioned that. So it's with QR codes, people say like, oh, QR codes are, I've seen them, 10 years ago, even more, 15 years ago. I think where the stickiness has happened is that scanners are already ubiquitous within smartphone cameras. So the fact that it's already ready to go, you don't need to download another app. It makes it easy to take advantage of that second screening in CTV environments where you already have, folks on their mobile device, maybe second screening while commercial break is happening. That's exactly the time then they can quickly bring it up, scan the QR code.
Got it. So something that was eye-opening to me, but totally relevant in our prep call for today's session was you were talking about the disconnect that exists between media planning and the creative teams. In your estimation, how can creative teams do a better job at learning about media metrics, right? And then in turn, how can the media teams benefit from learning more about how creativity plays to drive ROI? It seems that these silos truly need to be breaking down between these disparate teams within organizations. Otherwise, it's going to be the same old story. We've seen this movie before, and not really going to be able to harness the power of what connected TV strategy offers. Can you share a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'll even start with the Nielsen stat that I always like to mention, and it's that creative is responsible for 47% of your brand recall, and the rest of that pie chart is essentially different pieces of the media planning execution. So when you think of 47% is really what I'm showing the viewer, that's definitely something you can't ignore. And then when you think of those silos you were mentioning, usually the process is, there's a media plan put in place, there's research behind it, here are the people we're going to focus on, but we only produce one TV spot, or we have to be efficient, so we can only produce 2 TV spots. When you're focusing on, custom audience segmentation, whether it's very granular or very broad, how can you be that flexible when you only have 2 TV spots? And we have an interesting vantage point where we do see beyond just a couple of brands within a vertical. We see everything across a single vertical, all of the different competitors, all the way to across other verticals. So we're able to kind of see the different trends and see those different disconnects kind of broadly across. And what it really comes down to is you just have to get both the media and the creative folks in the room at the same time from the beginning. That way you can explain, the media folks can explain, well, this is what a completion means to us. This is what we want to accomplish. Your creative team then comes back like, oh, if these are the different nuances you want to accomplish, this is what the nuances on the creative end would look like. And then you're essentially bringing those two together. And that's kind of what we kind of continue to see in different ways. I think it's definitely something where, when we talk to creative groups, we kind of speak their language, but also interpret kind of the media side of it. Same on the media side. I'm constantly giving consultations and explaining, basic elements of video. What does pacing do to your message? What does having different text elements do to your message, and so on and so forth? How does that translate on different screens? CTV, linear TV, things like that.
Yeah, well, that's super important, and it's interesting. And I want to get back to creativity towards the end of our conversation here, and I want to dive right now into the kind of the heart of what I think is the most saleable part of the connected TV strategy, and that's where data and creativity come together. How has data influenced creative risen to the top recently? And what are some of the ways brands can look at approaching that they haven't been doing before? What are what's like the low-hanging fruit opportunities that are the basic ways brands should be approaching that?
Yeah, I think definitely it's part of it, understanding your audience. It's kind of like, the passage everyone knows. Now now that you know your audience, you know exactly where they are, you know how to target them. How do you then, what do you actually say to them once you're there? And that kind of comes back to the creative piece. It's like really understanding the nuance. I know like traditionally you think of traditional demographics and how those have evolved into a little bit more nuanced in behavior. Today a lot of the talk has been around, moving to a cookieless world and moving into a direction where you might not have as much granularity in those behaviors. But really the exercise is the same. It's what's the communication, what are the touch points, how does that change? Especially talking about data influencing creative. Data-driven creative is another kind of piece of our specialty, in the sense that you have to look at those nuances, not just from an audience perspective, but maybe a day parting perspective. You might talk about, if you're selling, coffee, alternatives, where you might talk about it differently in the morning versus a pick me up in the afternoon, versus say having a late night, cram session with, your colleagues and stuff like that. So it's really about those nuances and the in-betweens. I think another piece of it too is kind of learning and testing a lot. Came up a lot in the last panel. And I think one of the things too, in terms of how to be strategic about it, is that testing. Like, you're focusing from the get-go, you have your creative teams in the same room as your media teams at the beginning. You are hoping for these outcomes. If you don't hit those outcomes, what could you do differently? What worked, what didn't work, what maybe we should try differently across different screens.
Right. Yeah, I want to turn our attention now to how marketers are thinking about this multi-screen campaigns and really I would say the retargeting benefits of connected TV. I noticed that Tremor talks about the evolving living room. And I previously mentioned the multitasking viewer. You can also call them the distracted viewer. And the research does show that 70% of adults check content on a second device while watching TV, which obviously plummets brand recall rates. And there's these different ways that viewers are engaging, right, with content, either sitting on the couch with your phone versus a desktop. Are you in a lean back posture, being entertained on your TV? And all this means that viewers are interacting differently, right, with the advertising that they are getting. And this is where that whole segmentation comes in, which I think is fascinating. This idea that one-to-one custom segmentation can really help the ability to drive real ads in real time based on real-time TV viewing data, which I think is completing the entire circle, right? And retargeting is not just about serving up the same message to the same viewer whenever, but it's about how timely that is, right? And how relevant it is. I think that's super interesting about how targeted and how personalized CTV and multi-device, multi-screen targeting comes in. Can you talk about custom segmentation and how that drives the KPIs a campaign sets out up front, from driving incremental lift and purchase intent and brand awareness, web traffic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, when you think of, modern living rooms today, you now have this ecosystem of devices that, you can kind of track those different behaviors or how consumers interact with these different screens. So when you think about it from that lens, like an ecosystem as opposed to individually siloed experiences, it's really about thinking about how you're going to blend the different tactics that you're considering. So like, at the top of the conversation, we talked about think of how more nuanced audience targeting, think more nuanced creative decisions. And now when you throw in an ecosystem of devices, that's where you can kind of take it that extra step. So you think of mobile devices, you probably think of bite-sized content, meaning, shorter attention spans, going from one content to the other. So maybe your video ad should be a little shorter. Maybe you should consider the differences between vertical video behavior versus horizontal video behavior. If they're in vertical, they're probably using some kind of gaming app. So it's probably a more actionable environment. And then you kind of do all that kind of similar approach all the way up to CTV, where you have the biggest screen in the house, you have that linear TV feel, but then you have consumers kind of considering screens agnostic, even though they're behaving differently. So I think that trend of kind of uncovering all these different nuances across the board and just using the ones, it can be overwhelming. Like even now, I'm sure folks on the call who are listening are like, where do I even start? Start with what makes sense for you, and then tailor. If this didn't work this time, cool. Let's try it some other time where it makes more sense.
Well, that's the beauty of the CTV space is you could test, iterate, and optimize based on what's working versus the traditional linear buy, which I'm going to ask you about in a few moments here. I think this actually dovetails really nicely into getting us back to kind of the creative side of CTV, and especially what you do and your expertise is. So no, if you're a emerging DTC brand or you're a large TV advertiser looking for more personalization, what are some of the ways brands should be approaching their creative development to be successful in connected TV? I think that's the ability to really have flexibility that we talked about up front. Are there more opportunities than marketers think, and an easier way to get involved beyond the traditional television buy?
Yeah, I think the way you phrase the question is really, really great, in the sense of like, if you're that budding brand or, direct to consumer, a lot of, we do talk to kind of a fair bit of a lot of like first time video marketers from a consulting lens. And the thing that keeps coming up is they kind of want to focus on, I want my first video ad to be, this grandiose, put your stake in the ground, flagship video. And I don't think that's always necessarily the case, especially if you're thinking of dynamic creative. And really it's about, listening to what that brand voice is. Video is just that other extra, sight, sound, and motion extension of the brand. So it really, rings true, or you want it to ring true when it comes to the consumer. But in terms of the development aspect, it kind of goes back to, setting aside what you think it should be and kind of going back to what seems true to your brand, and then disseminating that across the audiences. And it really is like, you don't need one flagship video. You can even have the same formula of your video. You just change certain aspects of it depending on who you're talking to, who, time of day, what's the weather like, and even geo.
So I think that's super interesting, because that's essentially the opportunity, right? So instead of that big trophy spot that you're going to be putting so many resources and so much time into, I think the whole idea of connected TV is to be able to be faster and smarter, right, in your advertising. It allows that gap between market conditions, environmental factors, or what's happening in the consumer world to come together much faster than the traditional television spot and the process that goes through to run those. What would you say? I know you've briefly hit on it, but what would you say are some of the biggest differences in the creative storytelling approach between TV creative and the linear medium? You talked about weather, location, obviously. Whether you're talking to moms, you're talking to families, but also I think it goes a little bit deeper, right? It's about interests and genres, and how do you create so many various iterations of a creative spot, and you're not just banking on that one home run, universal Super Bowl ad, so to speak.
Yeah. So I'd say, yeah, and even to recap, and I'm sure folks on the call as well think this, when you're consuming content, you're not really necessarily focusing on the differences of how you're consuming the content. You're kind of doing it in the back of your mind, but not really conscious of it. So when it comes to that storytelling from CTV and linear TV, with linear for consumers, they don't kind of differentiate between the CTV and the linear. For marketers, though, it's a huge advantage to identify more of the delivery of each one. Linear, it's that longer term planning, high price, high competitive, slots that are very coveted. Especially you mentioned the Super Bowl. Whereas CTV, you can be more efficient, you can be more actionable, you can take learnings, apply it immediately to either the continuation of your flight or even your next campaign. So I think because, and actually kind of coming full circle, that flexibility that we kind of started the conversation on, that's kind of where CTV kind of gives you, and it gives you the beginnings of that kind of two-way conversation that we see in digital environments as well.
Yeah, I'd be interested to get your take on what are some of the misnomers of entering into the CTV space for brands, and what are some of the hypotheses that they have that really don't ring true, that upon further exploration, I think you mentioned that you guys aren't just doing the blocking and tackling, but you do a lot of consulting up front on best practices. What are some of the things that a client can come into the conversation with that basically proves wrong as they learn more about the flexibility and the targeting opportunities?
I'd say a great question, by the way, really, really awesome question. I think the biggest misnomer is that a lot of people are waiting for the thing that will solve all their problems. Like they're literally waiting for the one solution. It'll be my Swiss Army knife that will fix every single one of my video campaign problems. Everything will be streamlined into my dashboard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the misnomer is that they're the thing people are waiting on are really just tools. Data is a tool. Understanding different screens such as CTV is a tool. Creative is a tool. I think it's the solutions that people are looking for are when all of these different items converge based on what your KPIs, campaign goals are as a whole, or even, no matter whether you're doing an evergreen, always on tactic to, smaller tests and kind of granular tactics. It all exists kind of within that same ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for the audience, we're going to be diving into some Q&A here. So if you do have some questions, please go to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and throw them in there, and we'll get to them in just a minute. And, a question just came to me, which is thinking about all the marketers that my team advises on a daily basis, and often getting consensus and bringing stakeholders together to get on the train and row in the same direction. is sometimes daunting for marketers. Do you have what advice for the marketers listening in right now? What advice do you have on how to frame the argument internally, and who are the people that should be coming to the table from the brand? What different stakeholders need to come together? So if you're a head of media or you're a head of innovation or marketing at a brand, what should you be thinking as maybe the first and second step to kind of get on the path to success here internally?
Internally, yeah. I think it's definitely, we mentioned bring your creative folks to the table. I think from the brand side, it's kind of very similar. I think, because I think especially in bar tech and ad tech, everything's changing day in and day out. Just make sure, to tap into both the folks internally who are kind of similarly looking at these same spaces, maybe from a different lens. But then when you pull them into, excuse me, when you pull them into conversations from a media perspective, you kind of need to have those voices just to be able to understand if from the brand side, these are the people involved in what the extension of the digital side of the brand is going to be. They're probably going to have a very unique, and I would even say authentic voice that comes straight from the brand. So even having that trickle down to, say, the media team, the media agencies, the creative agencies, would be a huge benefit. I think though, having those voices at the table, granted, it's very difficult when you might have too many cooks in the kitchen. It goes back to the tailoring. It's like, okay, if we're going to focus on this type of initiative, tailor it with specific stakeholders in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Are you cool? We go to some questions from the audience.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, totally.
Let's dive in. I'm happy to see we've got a handful that have now come into the screen here. I love this first one. How do you see consumers interacting with brands differently this year? Are they looking to them more than just a product? That's really interesting, right? Because the narrative around where the world has over the last year has only perpetuated the idea that brands need to be not just products. All right, I would beg to say that a lot of brands say they're brands. I don't think they're brands. I think they're products. You're not a brand until you actually have a relevant, meaningful reason to be in a consumer's life. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, last year we saw a huge boost of it. I think definitely hearing from brands and how, how they're doing their part with COVID, we saw last summer, we saw Black Lives Matter be like a huge thing. And, seeing how different brands acknowledge it and how they stand by it, I think will be really important. I think it goes back to, we talked about audience segmentation, you no longer have that traditional kind of more gendered approach between, men, women, of, whatever age groups or demographics you're focusing on. It's much more nuanced. And I think as long as brands are open to that nuance and not afraid of it, I think it is also kind of a double-edged sword of brands who do want to do good, but maybe they don't get it right the first time. I think it's okay to at least try and show that you're trying, as opposed to, kind of being the silent voice and just kind of taking it business as usual.
Awesome. This is here's an interesting question. Do the two of you ever thought about partnering up on a Netflix show called Marketers on Zoom Getting Coffee? Okay, no, I made that one up. Okay.
I'm going to say, Jason, yeah.
I want to do a podcast with you. No, I made that one up. All right, let's go on. This is actually a really great question. A little bit different from some of what we've been talking about, but so important. And given your role at the company, obviously being there for so many of the advancement and changes, and now being, helping to lead this new creative hub, what do you think are the most important traits for a successful leader?
Important traits for a successful leader.
Not to put you on the spot here.
Yeah. I would say listening. I think active listening is overlooked. I think especially when you do have to talk to different stakeholders, different folks with different expertise, being able to synthesize the parts that do matter in the instance that, or the challenge that you're trying to solve. Especially from, coming from a solutions team, people think of us as like the people who have all the answers, but really we're here to kind of deep dive on what the actual challenge and pain points are in order to help you make the decision you're looking to make. So yeah, I hope anonymous attendee, I hope that answers your question.
It does, and it actually brings up something that I'm all too familiar with, which is a common mistake by vendors and partners, which is, they sell more than they listen. And I think that that's the difference between partnership and, being called a vendor. I like to call it being a partner. Yeah. That's interesting. What are I'm interested to know what some of the creative formats do you think are really going to take off in the coming year? Okay, an example would be started seeing just on in linear television a couple of years ago. Major League Baseball started launching these. Well, I guess it was Fox was starting to launch these 6-second ads, right, in between pitches, and that this whole idea of 6-second storytelling has come up in the CTV space. Do you see a certain format that is starting to kind of percolate a little bit more?
I think we'll see kind of an evolution of things that have been tried and true. Like, I know, like within the last decade, it was a lot of like, what should my video length be? Like, what's the perfect video length that will do XYZ? And I think even like, we were talking about having a trophy hero brand spot. I think we're going to see a little bit more of a departure of that. I think especially like, I know like a lot of people talk about interactive CTV and like, when will that take off? I think it's definitely emergent. I think we'll probably see more of an evolution of the traditional spot than say interactive TV. I think all of us are very excited about it, but I don't think what happened with smartphones in the end of the 2000s has yet to happen with CTV. But I think we're essentially on the verge of getting in that direction. So I think it's a two-parter. I think it's CTV really growing as a true two-way communication environment for marketers and consumers. And we're also going to see, because of kind of the current limitations of CTV, the creative end of it, of the videos kind of departing more into less traditional, kind of more experimentation on that front. So I think it's those two kind of growing side by side.
Yeah, and experimentation is always great because the learnings that come out of that, right? You hear a lot of marketers who talk about, if you're going to fail fast, right? So therefore, why not try to see what sticks? And if not, then, if you have the right partner and the ability to pivot, optimize your creative, then that's, I think, ultimately the place you should be in versus spending all the resources serving up that traditional advertisement through, the traditional channels, and then sitting back and hoping you can have the best, quarterly reports. I don't think there's as much ability to share what the attribution was and how it affects incrementality. I think it's this entire conversation, and what I did to kind of look into things before this has been so eye-opening to me as far as the technology advances that video advertising is offering. I guess I would ask one question here is, over the last, let's say, 2 years in time, which in technology is like 30 years, Can you, I mean, being the insider here, can you point to one thing specifically maybe that's been a catalyst for CTV advertising, and or has it been just the growth of the proliferation of Rokus and Fire TVs and Apple TVs? Is it that now all the major media companies, this week, or I think today, Paramount Plus launches, are getting into the game? What would you say is one or two of the biggest catalysts for your industry?
I think it's a lot of, I know we've said kind of convergence ad nauseum, but I think it's a lot of different things kind of maturing in the last, I'd say definitely the maturation of kind of ad tech, the, different players kind of coming together under one roof. But then also kind of seeing you talked about partnerships. I think it's kind of everything kind of coming together and kind of behind CTV that's really made it pop. When you do kind of take advantage of that, the largest screen in the house, the equivalent of linear, but really giving it the treatment that you're used to when programmatic started on desktop, then on mobile, now in CTV spaces. You're essentially taking a very mature industry into, from the manufacturer point of view, also kind of starting that maturation. So the fact that both the industries are coming together, or at least now kind of on the same playing field, you're going to probably see a lot more advancements in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah. Would you put measurement in that category as well as
absolutely
one of the, yeah,
absolutely. So being able, so that's kind of the part of the ad tech side, the programmatic side, like the fact that you're bringing measurement to CTV environments definitely kind of brings that together and really makes it kind of a big push forward.
I assume you watched the Super Bowl. It wasn't this year. What did you think overall about the creative we saw this year?
So I will say, like, I think the way that brands were able to kind of take the stage, and probably what a lot of people were very excited about, but obviously a very different scenario on the night, compared to say last year when people can go in person or have, these big parties. I think the sentiment behind a lot of the brands, and we always see a day each year in the Super Bowl ads, but I think being able to know that people are ready for funny, lighthearted, there is a future past all of this, we're all in it together, was really, really great. I'm trying to think of like a specific one, but it's been a month from now, so I'm sorry that I can't think of a specific one to bring up.
Yeah, no, I think I think it came in at the first quarter or right before kickoff. Maybe it was the M&Ms, the M&M spot where everyone, anytime you felt sorry for somebody, you just said, "Oh, here's some M&M." I don't know. That was, to me, I love that the most. People obviously talk about the seriousness of the Bruce Springsteen spot, of course, which was great. But I think Super Bowl is all about funny and being entertained and the wild and the wacky. So that was my. What do you think, David? You're kind of the expert on all things Super Bowl at Brand Innovators.
I mean, Reddit had you guys mentioned 6-second, right, ads before, right? Reddit had my favorite ad of the day. I think Oatly, right, whether you loved them or hate them, you were talking about them. It's always risky to me, whether it was Jeep or some of the others, when you go for the heartstrings and then it feels very forced. Especially when you're talking about younger audiences, they see that and they can recognize that really easily. So, if you're going to go for the emotionally evocative kind of thing, you really got to do it, and not just say, "Hey, we want to make people cry," and that's your brief. And then they know, right? Then they can tell. So, look, it's fun. I love talking about it. I don't know what it must have been like to produce these kind of ads amidst the pandemic too. I think that's another thing. we probably saw, we'll see a very different mindset next year, but it's always fun. And on the CTV OTT side, I forget who it was, but there's that famous quote of like, there's only two business models in media, right? Bundling and unbundling. So I feel like we're very close to that point now of like, well, you got Paramount and Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and HBO and this one and that one and this one and that one. And it's like, okay, great. But like, who's going to be the one to give me that first deal to like get all of them together? And then you basically got cable, right? Again, right? So
that cable's going to come back and it's end up going to being the same price and you're going to, right? We're all going to get those boxes back in our homes.
Right. But like, I mean, as a viewer and as a consumer, it is certainly a golden age right now of just amazing content and, right. So I love it from that perspective. But no, guys, this was great. And I know we want to keep the show rolling. So Jason, I will say thank you. Gabby, thank you so much. We'll have to get that podcast off the ground soon.
Awesome.
All right, guys. Thank you both so much. We have a few more fantastic sessions today. We're going to have a keynote for you guys right now from Tremor Video's own Terrence Scroop. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. The Vice President of Insights at Tremor International. Terrence, welcome. Oh, on mute. Can't hear you.
Typical. It wouldn't be a proper meeting if somebody didn't mess up text. So leave it.
I mean, I think it's been everybody so far. It's just like I feel like Zoom just needs to have it like it's in that tiny little thing with the microphone so nobody sees it. They just need to blast it right up there. Like you're still on mute, right? But no, thank you so much for being here. I do too. I'm on mute half the time. I'm talking for 5 minutes and I don't see everybody's like waving to me. I have no idea. So it's all good. But thank you so much for being here. The stage is yours and I'll be back in about 20 minutes.
Yeah, great. So we're going to do something slightly different, I guess, in terms of changing up format now. So I am going to present to all of you the evolving living room, or a truncated version of the evolving living room, which Jason and Gabby alluded to in the last meeting. So that is our thought leadership piece that we bring out to inform our clients and partners of exactly what is going on in the media space. And how they can take full advantage of that. So shifting into a little bit of what that entails, we want to start off with a pretty simple chart and a pretty simple concept, and that's the concept of cord cutting. So obviously video is evolving very, very quickly in this day and age, and cord cutting is not a new concept. It's obviously been kicked around for quite a few years now. But now that we have seen how it has played out, it's interesting to see exactly what the trade-offs are and how consumers are adapting and adjusting to the different video formats that do exist in the marketplace. So what you're looking at here, starting in 2016 on the left side of the chart all the way up to this current year, 2021, is the US household penetration of traditional pay TV. So that meaning satellite or cable. And you can see that year on year, we've seen about a 3% drop off in terms of that penetration in US households, onto the point where now in this year, about 66% of US households still have a traditional pay TV setup, which is interesting. And nothing to obviously overlook, 66% is still a very significant part of the market. And there are certain elements of pay TV that make it very attractive and sticky for the consumers. Certain genres of TV like live sports and live and local news are very firmly rooted in that place and have a very loyal following. And it's also just very familiar to all of us as consumers. It's what we were raised on for the most part. And so there's a very low barrier to entry and kind of ease of use that makes it still very familiar and easy for us to kind of tune into. But what's interesting is when we overlay what CTV has done in that same time period, we see that the penetration has really usurped pay TV in terms of just being present in households, onto the point where now in 2021, we're quickly approaching 80%. Some other research sources actually say that we're over 80%. And there's a lot of different factors that kind of play a role in terms of why CTV has found such an easy entry into the US household. A lot of it has to do with technology, and that the technology that we go out and upgrade our household tech stack with nowadays is oftentimes designed in such a way that it is ready for CTV to go day one. And our behaviors have also shifted significantly in such a way that we are very accustomed nowadays to connect all of our devices to the internet. It's not a really big ask nowadays. When we even walk into a restaurant, we're oftentimes looking for the Wi-Fi immediately. So this increased level of connectivity and technology options that are present for US consumers have really helped CTV jump into the forefront of the mindset very significantly. Now, while those trends were playing out and we saw that pay TV had dropped off significantly in terms of household penetration, and CTV seemingly has picked up some of that slack, one thing that we're noticing is that total amount of time that US consumers are spending with television is pretty consistent year on, year off. So looking at this chart, we're looking at the total number of minutes or average number of minutes that US adults are spending watching TV year on year. And there's a bit of ebb and flow, obviously. What's interesting, obviously, was 2020 was fairly anomalistic in terms of how it had shifted our lifestyles and behaviors. And so we saw a pretty significant uptick in terms of total time spent with television. And it's yet to be seen exactly how 2021 and 2022 beyond will play out in its entirety. This data was pulled earlier in 2020, and we obviously didn't know what state we'd be in currently in terms of vaccination rollout and working from home and homeschooling, et cetera. So it's very possible that in the near future, we could even see these projections for 2021 and 2022 increase slightly more. So if pay TV is dropping and CTV is increasing and total time spent watching TV is fairly consistent, then obviously there are some behavior changes that are existing or starting to take form. And that's what we're showing you on this chart. So looking from left to right is the first quarter of the last 3 years and the total amount of time that consumers were spending with video across various types of devices. So that blue segment of each of the bars is your live and time shifted TV, which is still very significant, but quickly eroding away as other formats like CTV and smartphone and personal computer are all starting to share the pie of time spent with video. But what's interesting to note is that orange slice, the connected TV devices, are obviously picking up the most of the slack as people move away from traditional time shifted and live TV. And that's because there's a lot of similarities in terms of the viewing experience in certain regards. Certainly, when we think about where connected TV is being accessed, it oftentimes is that large and primary screen, oftentimes in a social area in the household, like a living room. So it's very conducive for co-viewing for a singular household. The viewing experience in a lot of regards is similar, but there's just more options in terms of and controls that are also afforded. So CTV is really uniquely positioned to kind of replace that live and time shifted TV behavior. Whereas there's a utility and rationale for watching video on your smartphone or your personal computer, but it's not as convenient or useful, especially when you're trying to share that viewing experience with somebody else. Now, kind of closing the loop on that concept of cord cutting, we did some research of our own last year to understand the landscape and perceptions related to CTV and traditional pay TV. And one of the things that we found that was particularly interesting was when we asked consumers whether or not they were intending to cut the cord, whether that be with satellite or with cable, there was a pronounced increase in the percentage of people that were willing or planning to do that if they'd already had a level of access and experience with streaming media services, ad-supported or subscription-based. So people are already thinking about making that shift, and being able to essentially sample in the convenience of their own household and switch really seamlessly between the two only further exacerbates that trend. And one thing that we think contributes here, we touched a little bit before, kind of at the end of that last call with Jason and Gabby, about pricing and how we're rushing back towards the expensive cable model. But cable companies especially had done a great disservice, I think, to their own brand equity over the years, because not only were they costly, but those costs tended to creep up unannounced on consumers. And we oftentimes found ourselves renegotiating our bills. So there is a lot of baggage attached to those services. Whereas CTV services are still relatively new. They're kind of the new kid on the block. And they haven't had that kind of negative connotation associated with them. The costs are distributed sometimes across various services, so it doesn't seem like you're getting that big bill at the end of every month. And there's so much diversity in terms of what's available. When we actually polled our panel, we found that nearly 90% of our panelists felt either favorably or very favorably about CTV services, and kind of rounding out that 100%. Most of the rest of the responses were just neutral. Very few people had any kind of a negative opinion of CTV services. Now, thinking about kind of that diversity and how people are starting to access CTV, there's a couple of different inroads. And just in rank order, I guess, from the largest to the smallest. The biggest first in that bottom right corner highlighted in yellow are streaming media players. So those are Apple TVs, Chromecasts, Fire Sticks. There's a great variety of those services that people are using. There's a lot of benefit here. The general cost of buying these is relatively low. So pretty equitable for both high household incomes and low household incomes. They're fairly small and unobtrusive, so easy to kind of tuck away in your media console or behind your television. And they've kind of become the new stocking stuffers. So we're finding not only are many households having a streaming media player in them, but oftentimes I think over 60% of people that have a streaming media player actually have more than one available in their household. Moving from there to the next biggest are smart TVs. Smart TVs had an amazing year last year in 2020 as we were all very homebound. We were reevaluating the setup of our households and putting more money into home investment. And that included upgrading our technology. So we actually saw the number of smart TVs in the US market jump by nearly 20 million since we last updated this particular number. So a really significant year for people to shift into this more advanced TV market and provide a degree of accessibility in terms of accessing smart TVs and CTV and OTT content. After smart TVs, we have gaming consoles. Easy to overlook gaming consoles because they are, as their name suggests, primarily focused on gaming. But in reality, that's not where the majority of time on gaming consoles is spent. It's pretty evenly split between gaming and streaming video. There's a very set of the population that is familiar and uses their gaming consoles frequently. They get very comfortable in those user interfaces, and so they oftentimes just segue from one action to the other without switching devices. And then last but not forgotten are Blu-ray players, kind of the original device that connected the internet to the TV. Every time we revise these numbers, we do see that number drop ever so slightly, but still very significant. Many US consumers still using them, nearly 25 million, certainly nothing for us to overlook. Now, when we think about how Tremor in particular plays in this space, what we have seen are a lot of smaller segments of that overall diversity of connected devices trying to build kind of their own entry point for advertisements. And we have seen some of our clients kind of investigate that space as well. It is somewhat myopic to kind of focus on just a singular TV manufacturer and their ad potential, or a singular streaming device group, because you are only getting a small segment of the total market. No singular TV manufacturer has really a commanding percentage of the market. I don't think anything that really exceeds 30%. So what Tremor brings to play is really kind of a broad and aggregate view of all these different inroads, which makes sure that all of our clients are serviced appropriately and can find consumers no matter where they are connecting to the CTV world. It allows us to capture nearly 95% of US CTV households. So just a kind of winning strategy in terms of making sure that you're not leaving any of your target audience unengaged. Now, one of the things that, one of the charts I find to be most interesting and indicative of what transpired in 2020 with COVID is these numbers that we're looking at from eMarketer. So eMarketer is obviously well known and famous for their projections at the beginning of the year across the entire media landscape. And at the beginning of 2020, they projected the OTT subscriber universe in the US, represented by the blue line in this chart. When COVID occurred and we started to go into quarantine and lockdown and various types of self-isolation, eMarketer, along with many other reputable sources, acknowledged the fact that they expected CTV and OTT activity to increase, but that it would be a temporary blip on the radar, essentially. But come kind of the end of Q2 or beginning of Q3 of 2020, eMarketer took the step of actually revising this projection and many other projections because obviously consumer behaviors and lifestyles had shifted so dramatically. And so that orange line represents that re-projection of the OTT subscriber universe. And you can see that it adjusted from 192 million up to 207 million, which is a number that they originally weren't expecting to hit until 2023. So a very significant step into the future and a trend line that carries on from there at a fairly similar level. So not, again, a market correction that we expect to see happen anytime soon. It's really much more of a long-term trend that will take years to play out. Now, in terms of what makes CTV so useful and unique to consumers, these are the 4 pillars we primarily focus on. First is extended reach. So as you remember that first slide I was showing you related to cord cutting, you can't really find all of your audience in one video platform or another. You need to really diversify and make sure that you're not, again, overlooking any of your target audience by focusing singularly on pay TV or singularly on CTV. There's a lot of complementary elements there and technologies that we can utilize to make sure that we are on CTV finding those consumers that are not accessible on the linear TV space. Better qualified audience speaks again to the fact that CTV is much more akin to a digital channel than a traditional broadcast channel. So we have much more granular data and understanding of who is viewing what, as opposed to relying on representative panels, which are kind of an antiquated approach at this stage in the game and also very limited in terms of their overall view of the entire market. After that, we have lower ad to content ratio, which has a real benefit for both consumers and for advertisers. From a consumer standpoint, fewer ads do have a benefit in their minds, especially in the US, where we are inundated with more advertising than really anybody else in the world. Whether conscious or shown less advertising and getting back to that primary programming that much quicker. And from an advertiser's perspective, there's a big upside because those commercial pods are fewer and shorter. There's less competition, there's less noise, and we see that really pay off in a host of different brand KPIs that are beneficial for brand building. And then finally, the measurement capabilities, which again, were touched on in the last talk, are continuing to advance. And again, because of the granularity of data and the digital likeness of this channel, there's a lot more that we can provide back to our clients in terms of informing them of how their campaigns performed and a lot of the detail and opportunity to optimize appropriately. So just touching on, again, what I was alluding to in those last couple of pillars, there is a great benefit for brands in terms of utilizing CTV. So viewability first and foremost, which is obviously has become a very important metric for all of us over the years, doesn't have the same challenges within the CTV environment that we see in other digital channels. CTV is designed by its very nature to be highly viewable, and that does have a very important trickle-down effect in terms of driving other brand KPIs like ad and brand recall, which we see very elevated after CTV exposure, and then that drives consumers further down the funnel in terms of taking appropriate actions like purchasing and finding out more about a particular brand or product. And then the engagement rate is also very different because of the high level of viewability, the low ad to content ratio. And we are seeing, as Gabby alluded to in her discussion, more and more of our brands looking to figure out how to take this very passive channel traditionally of TV and make it more engaging or help usher those consumers in that journey through things like QR codes and similar technologies. So really making it a really seamless experience for consumers as opposed to them having to remember brands and then go searching for them. Now, one thing that we find interesting as we were talking a little bit about how this particular space is diversifying quickly, especially as it relates to subscriptions, is the fact that there are a lot of players here. For a long time, the burden was really on Netflix and Hulu to build up this new kind of format and kind of evangelize it to the marketplace. But now we have a lot of really big names coming out and contributing. So obviously Disney Plus made a massive splash only a little over a year ago, followed quickly by HBO Max and by Peacock. And if you've watched TV in the last month or a month and a half for the Super Bowl, you undoubtedly saw an advertisement for Paramount Plus. So we're getting a lot of different players in this space. But what we anticipate is that we don't expect the subscription video on demand space to really grow all that much more, even though we have all these new players. There's going to be more of a ground war between all of them competing for content and premium content. And so that's going to cause a certain degree of consumer confusion as people do want to chase their favorite shows or the content that they love. And they're not going to be as wed essentially to these specific services. they can basically move and pivot very quickly. And we obviously know that the cost does cause some issues as well. Even just building out a really simple rate card of a couple of on-demand and a couple of live streaming solutions still adds up to $60, which looks like a great savings, but people want to spend even less than that when they're thinking about CTV. So there is obviously going to be some sticker shock and eventual retraction in terms of the cost implications of CTV services. And we know that in our own polling, we've seen a lot of consumers say that when they are thinking about reducing the amount they spend on TV, the number one choice they're going to make is reducing the number of subscription services, even more so than canceling cable or canceling satellite. And a lot of people are figuring out how to make up for that loss of that content by looking at free and ad-supported services. And as those grow in terms of brand recognition and knowledge, we're going to see that become even more and more commonplace. And then quickly, one of the things that we think is going to be much more transformational, rather, about people coming into the CTV space, especially as they upgrade their technology, is this concept of free video on demand, where we're seeing more and more apps becoming readily available and not even requiring downloading for consumers. So they're right there, and they kind of have at their fingertips a whole diversity of options when they're thinking about what they want to watch. And so a really quick exemplary video shows you how a consumer might go searching for a movie. Obviously, the cinema industry unfortunately fell off a cliff this year, so more and more people are watching movies from home. Look for the Terminator. They have a couple of different options. Some are free, some are rent to view. It's very easy for them to kind of make that quick social contract, understand that they'll sit through a couple of ads, very similar to trailers that we're all accustomed to in the movies, and then they're off to the races watching that content, as opposed to pulling out their credit card or subscribing to any kind of additional cost. And one thing that we still see as kind of a misconception in the marketplace is that people are leaving pay TV and going to CTV because they're entirely ad averse. And while that does apply perhaps to some segment of the consumers, it's certainly the minority. It obviously costs a premium to kind of avoid ads entirely, and not everybody is necessarily ad averse. Nearly 3/4 of the market is still watching ad-supported content or seeking that out. And 2020 also had an interesting effect there, when people were really blazing through their subscription libraries and accumulating costs essentially as well. They were increasingly searching for free content and willing to, again, make that trade-off in terms of watching ads as opposed to paying additional money. And that has a real benefit for consumers as well. They understand that social contract. They're becoming more and more aware of how the targeting works to bring them more relevant ads that might resonate with them better. And so they have a much better opinion of these ads after they've kind of gone down that road of making that agreement. And finally, just thinking about 2020 and the impact that it had on consumers kind of sampling what was in the marketplace, we saw in our own research, and this was early in 2020 and back in July, that 35% of US consumers had tried a new ad-supported streaming service since the beginning of the COVID lockdown, and nearly 80% of them were actually intending to continue using that service. So a really unique moment in time for kind of sampling and testing out new services, which is going to result in long-term loyalty for consumers and help kind of guide them into some of these new venues and new video viewing options. So really great positive opinions of CTV that are similar to subscription services when we're thinking about ad services. So quality and variety of content, but also the quality and number of ads are something that consumers register and acknowledge. So a big benefit, not just for the viewing experience, but also for advertisers that want to invest in that particular space. And just a couple of additional stats again, relating to 2020 and the impact that had on some of our partners. So we saw the signups increasing dramatically for these different free services, as well as the amount of time spent. And then the terminology in some of the searches was also changing as time went on. Again, as people were kind of blazing through all of that paid for subscription service content, they were looking more and more for free movies and free video. So a real shift in terms of the consumer mindset when they're thinking about how to find and access different viewing programs. So that's a quick summary. We obviously are constantly maintaining kind of thought leadership piece, and that was only a small segment of what we have and bring back to our partners. So I hope you guys found that interesting. And if you ever do want to learn more, you can always reach out to myself and my colleagues at Tremor, and we can always set up a session with you and your teams or your clients and inform you about anything that's relevant and give you the stats you need to kind of make the right choices there.
All right. Well, that was really awesome and insightful. I think, to your point, towards the end there, I think we're at that point in the saturation of streaming services, right? Where it's not about switching from cable or cutting the cord to streaming, but now you have to decide which streaming service I have to get. And it's like, oh, well, Disney's doing this and Paramount's doing that. Should I still be paying for that one, right? Which brings me to my point. Someone's got to bundle these together, cut all the prices down a little bit, and I'll sign up for them all, right? Like just make it a little, right? So which we know will happen sooner rather than later. But this is great, Terrence. So thank you so much. It's a fascinating landscape. And as a consumer, it benefits us all because we get these great shows and certainly lots of opportunity for our industry as well. So we really appreciate you sharing that with us today.
Great, my pleasure.
All right. Well, we're going to keep the show rolling. We have two more amazing speakers. Our friend Megan Matlock, who's the AVP of Media at AT&T, is going to be joining us in just a second. And I believe we have one of Terrence's colleagues, Jeff Zito, the VP of Sales for the Midwest over at Tremor Video, who's going to be moderating this discussion, unless it's Paul. Maybe I had that wrong. Oh, okay.
It's Paul, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that. I must have switched the sessions in my head. Megan, it's always great to have you here. Paul, welcome to the virtual stage. How you guys doing today?
Doing well, thank you.
Doing great.
Great. Well, look, I mean, we've had a really phenomenal program so far, talking about all things media, digital video, TV. We've been talking about, Facebook and Apple and the cookie-less marketing world that we're heading into. We've been talking about over-the-top TV and CTV and that fantastic landscape. So it's really been wonderful. We're thrilled to have you both here today. Paul, I will turn it over to you, and I'll be back in a little bit when things wind down. So the stage is yours, guys.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Hey, Megan, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you doing, Paul?
Good, good. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So we're 1 year basically into the pandemic. I'm just curious at the onset how it's changed your work environment. Were you working from home, et cetera?
Well, I am 50 weeks in to working from home. So have been doing that. I've had to go into the office maybe 1 or 2 times for some IT support as some of those kinds of things opened back up, and it's a very different experience, but have been very fortunate to have been able to have worked from home through all of this.
Same. Yeah, we have been fortunate as well. Great. Before we jump into some of the questions, I'm hoping you can just kind of tell the audience your roles and responsibilities and your tenure and the line of businesses that you touch there at AT&T.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the Assistant Vice President of Media Strategy here at AT&T, and I focus on all things B2B. So I oversee the AT&T business portfolio from a media strategy perspective, which includes small, medium enterprise customers across a multitude of products and services. I also have responsibilities over our corporate brand initiatives. And so that includes things like our CSR initiatives, external affairs, public affairs, and any sort of broader reaching brand messaging that we would be putting out there from an AT&T perspective. I've been here for 6 years and, have, 16, 17 plus years experience in the industry, and couldn't be happier with what we've been able to do here at AT&T.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So given our topic today, I just wanted to first just kind of level set on how you see the two channels that we're discussing today. Can you kind of give me a 30,000 foot view of how you see linear versus digital video and CTV?
So I actually, from my perspective, I think you actually have to look at everything holistically, because it all comes down to how people are consuming video today, and people are, and which audiences and messages are resonating. And so you actually have to look at the picture holistically and understand where that's going, because you can't just look at them in isolation. You have to really put together a comprehensive video strategy that is inclusive of both CTV, OTT, as well as linear.
Yeah, we're seeing that from our clients as well too, just this merging of it being video, right? And regardless of the channel, it is still sight, sound, and motion across all those platforms and screens. During the pandemic, how have you seen audience shifts in these specific channels?
Well, I mean, I think you've seen, you've seen a lot more people start the acceleration of video consumption within OTT and CTV perspective. I think that has happened across the board. I think there was a point in time where I think you certainly also saw some spikes in things like news and linear TV. But, you know, as the pandemic happened and things like live sports disappeared from people's television sets, you know, there was so much unknown going on. So people were looking and people were home and asked not to go out and do things. TV kind of had a little resurgence in video and finding new content and video content. I think, you know, it became a great place for people to go and find some escapism.
Right. During our initial call, you mentioned millennials as business decision makers. Have you seen this demo change over the course of the pandemic, or was this shift actually transpiring prior to the pandemic?
Yeah, so this actually happened prior to the pandemic. So, you know, we have been, you know, from both sides of our house, the consumer side and the business side, have for a while been sort of working towards making sure that we're continuing to follow consumption habits of our audiences. And so that meant that we were shifting dollars into the OTT, CTV, TV-like space with these sort of digital platforms across, you know, all lines of our business. And so when we started, I mean, 2015, 2016, you know, one of the ways that we did that is we were looking through just sort of who your audience is. You know, I think on the B2B side, a lot of times people immediately think that the CEO, they have an image of who the CEO, the CIO is right. at a company, and of who that is and how you reach them. But actually, you know, well over 50% of IT decision makers are millennials. You know, so we've got to make sure that we were doing things in different ways to make sure we were also reaching that audience as well. And one of those ways became CTV. And so it started off in places like very specific news focused channels that were geared to that audience, and how we could do some integrations there, you know, and then so slowly but surely it certainly started to expand, and as consumption habits shifted, it realized it wasn't just the millennial B2Bs that were watching connected TV, all of our decision makers were as well. And so it stopped being the millennial B2B strategy and really just become table stakes as part of what we do today.
Awesome, great. Let's kind of focus into linear right now. Do you remember how the pandemic changed your plans just before this time in March last year, and what you were planning for linear and what eventually happened?
Yeah, you know, across the board. So we are one of the 3 presenting sponsors of the Masters in April. And fast and furious, we're working through the launch of a new campaign. In fact, when all of this happened, my counterparts were in LA getting ready to shoot shoot the spots and those productions got canceled. And you know, what was going to be this lovely, lofty, very big brand campaign, we quickly had to say, you know what, our customers are not, like, what do our customers need right now? Because businesses were so significantly impacted by this, from enterprises that needed to very quickly increase their bandwidth because all of their employees were going home and they needed additional network support, to our small businesses that were so impacted by some of these stay-at-home orders and those kinds of things. And so we really had to pivot our strategy and our messaging to understand, like, how to make sure we were reaching them and saying and helping them in the way that we could with our products and services. And so, you know, from a linear TV perspective, we felt like we had a really strong baseline in terms of what we kind of ongoingly had with news presence. Because that's where people were going, and we knew we were there. And then we really had to pivot a lot of sports because sports didn't happen. And so there's been a lot of time of understanding sort of what was going to happen in that marketplace and how things were shifting going through some of these kinds of things. And it really was an opportunity for us to sort of look holistically across, you know, all of our TV investment across our company to make sure that we were speaking to all of our customers with the right messaging going on.
Right. I'm sure the challenges as they relate to sports were just almost impossible to work around. The Masters I'm sure pretty quickly told you that they were going to have the event later in the year. So you had,
yeah. So we certainly knew we got very, they're great partners. And so we certainly were able to quickly understand what that dynamic was going to look like and how that was going to go. And we're able to really do some great things with what they ended up doing from a replay perspective, as well as sort of what, when they actually had the tournament back in November. So, it's very, it was a very different year of how we would have expected it to be, but it taught us a lot.
Absolutely. So what do you anticipate as you get ready to approach the upfronts this year?
Well, I think there's still those sort of ongoing conversations like we're having today. Linear TV ratings are still eroding. Connected TV, OTT is still increasing. And so, we've got to continue to go back through and make sure that we are optimizing where we are appropriately to where our customers are. And then, thinking through sort of, advanced TV and sort of what we can do from a targeting perspective. And then, the pandemic has taught us nothing. It's that flexibility is key to any plan moving forward. Is that we've got to all be flexible and able to pivot, and we need our partners to be able to do that with us.
Absolutely. I think that's super important in the linear space, but also with all your partners now, right? We talked about that on our initial call, that flexibility is kind of the word of the day as it relates to planning anything in this environment right now. What do you think is going to be a permanent part of the outcome of the pandemic with regards to linear? Do you think there's something that was good that came out of it that you're going to utilize moving forward?
I think it really is from that perspective. I really do think the piece around, the flexibility and sort of the shifting of sort of the importance of that and building into plans. And I think the pandemic there was a lot of additional relationships that continued to be built with those partners as people really dug in to really try to help through some of those kinds of things. So I think just the strength of the relationships and partnerships that kind of, I think, came out of those to really start working towards sort of a common objective and really continuing to build in sort of that flexibility into what we need to do.
Absolutely. Great. Well, let's dive into digital, online, OTT, CTV, and talk a little bit about that channel. How are you currently utilizing this channel?
So we use it actually in a multitude of ways. So as I mentioned, we have multiple audience segments that we have products and services that best align to those products and services. And so, we certainly look at it from an overarching branding perspective. So when we think about our television investments and our connected TV investments, we think about from an upfront perspective. We certainly have sort of an element of what we would do there, but then it gets built into almost all of our plans now moving forward, even some of our performance-based plans, to make sure that we're continuing to drive demand and really using that channel to continue to enhance and tell our stories.
Right. Do you see that, and you talked about this a little bit, the continued increase in consumption on the OTT CTV side. Do you think that's making significant changes to your allocation to these channels, linear versus CTV?
I think it is. I think it's become table stakes. I think it's one of those things that it just has to be part of everything that we do. And linear is not. We've been very much a very digital first approach to what we do on the B2B side, and so there is. It just becomes more predominant within some of the BAU tactics. And so it's almost for us less of a share shift from linear TV, from a share shift in from standard display.
Right. We talked a little bit about brand safety and brand suitability on our initial call, Megan, and you kind of said they're hand in glove. Really you have to think about both of them as equal kind of KPIs. Can you just talk about how you're managing brand safety and that suitability element?
Yeah, so there's a lot of deep partnerships with third parties that allow us to do that, really working very closely on inclusion and exclusion lists so that we're making sure that we're thinking through the content correctly within partnerships. And so it's just there's a lot that goes into what you would feel comfortable with, and there's nuance to that, because what one brand even sort of within our house feels comfortable with is different than maybe another one and another sort of brand within that umbrella. Because as you're reaching a consumer, might be very different than what you want to be showing to a B2B. So there's a lot of work that has to go into it, to ensuring some of that quality piece is there, because it can't just be, let's just go target because they're there. You've got to continue to ensure that you're running in the right environments.
Right. And that targeting piece that you mentioned allows us to segue into the news of the week, which is Google's announcement. How do you foresee the space looking post cookies?
Very different. Though I actually, as I think about this, because we've spent a lot of time thinking about this, as I hope all brands are, because this is a pretty big shift. In that, we've all worked very hard to create these relevant one-to-one experiences. And that is sort of this pendulum is just shifting back. And so, in one instance, if we've been in the industry a while, we've kind of actually know how to do this because we've done it before. We just felt like we had evolved. But I think first and foremost, consumer privacy is really important, and it should be very important to brands. As publishers, it's a really important issue, and we need to make sure that we are taking it very seriously. And so, but as things are moving quickly, things are shifting dynamically, things change every day in kind of this landscape as people are sort of working through it. For us, it's really about understanding that this is happening, really figuring out what we think that impact is and where those impact places are going to be, and starting now testing and learning into solutions that we think could be ways to offset that issue, and just sort of having to know that things are not going to be as targeted as they once were. But how do you find that balance in that space? And you've got to test your way into it, and you've got to be doing that now, because I can't believe it's already March. I feel like the new year happened, I blinked and it happened. So we're going to blink and it's going to be 2022 and we're going to be there. And so if we're not doing it now, it's going to be too late.
Yeah, similarly to, while there's no one singular measurement tool for us, there's also now going to be not one singular means by which to go forward in this, kind of universal ID environment. What do you think? Virginia was the latest state to adopt CDPA. So now we have California and Virginia. And I think to your point, and you've kind of already answered this, it's just going to be continuation of that adoption and less ability to target. So how do you think you're going to face that world moving forward?
For us, I think it becomes, sort of understanding the contextual space is going to really understanding sort of from that perspective. I think it's focusing and doubling down on your own sort of first party data, which is going to be really critical. It's also sort of partnering with other partners that have really strong first party data that they, within their own ecosystems. So I think, it's not just necessarily the walled gardens that are going to benefit, but I think it's also some of those premium publishers that are going to come back into resurgence, because they are going to be able to sort of internally do that. But I think you're going to just see a lot of what has become something where we worked really hard to sort of have this, very focused audience first approach that you worked to do at scale. That piece is just going to become more fragmented, and how you can go do that and where you can go do that. But, there's going to be solutions. I think that's the other piece, is that right now we're trying to figure out the interim steps of the solution, but there's going to be so much innovation in this space over the next few years that I really do think that we're going to find some additional solutions that are going to come to light that are going to end up working. And it may not be exactly how it was, but it's not going to be this mass, you can't target anybody anymore kind of thing. That there's a balance that will be struck, and I think we'll all find it.
Right. You talked about first party briefly there, and I'm assuming that from a small business portion, that is definitely a robust part of your targeting offering. But talk to me about, from a corporate standpoint, how do you utilize first party data with that segment of your business?
So that for us is, it's identifying, decision makers at companies, and really sort of thinking about it from a company level, and really just being fine-tuned with what we need to do to reach those customers. A lot of times, On the enterprise side, it's a little broader because there is such a really strong connection. Within the B2B space, there's also a sale. There's also a sales a component that happens in that dynamic. And so, we work really hard to make sure that we're creating relevant experiences for sort of decision makers at the company level, thinking through sort of what's the best way we can reach those through some account-based marketing.
Mm-hmm. Again, contextual will play a large role in that moving forward.
Yeah,
for sure. Talk to us a little bit about creative differences that you utilize in the digital space as opposed to the linear space. Do you modify creative for the digital side?
We do, yeah. So we have, and I've got great peers on our creative side who do a lot of really great work in that space. And so, we've all worked really closely to really make sure that we're thinking through like what is performing best in which mediums. And so most of the times, if they're going to go create shoot a 30-second spot, they're not on the back end then going to go to try force a 15 and 6-second cut down. They've pre-scripted what they think that should look like so that they're capturing those kinds of pieces when they go to build creative for those digital environments. And then we have video that is purpose-built specifically just for video, that is separate from anything we would ever run on linear, so that that we're continuing to enhance and create new messaging and new products and services to enhance, just talk about our products and services in those different ways.
Have you experimented with shortened creative, like 6 seconds? And
we have.
Yep. How was that experiment?
It's okay. Like I think for us on 6-second creative to try to impact extremely complex technology solutions is very, very difficult. So I think we really leaned into that 6-second space being much more a way to sort of reinforce brand. And so, and key quick messages. So I think we really have seen 15s probably play out better for us than we have probably those 6-second spots, but it's something we continue to iterate on and use as reinforcement tools of sort of the brand and the brand messaging of people that we know are sort of in part of the campaign. So it's not just the only thing someone would see.
Right. We talked about this just briefly on our call in preparation for this, but you mentioned some of the things that you think are going to be staying powers with regards to creative messaging as it relates to the pandemic, empathy, things like that. Do you foresee that being something that's just kind of consistent and pervasive from here on out?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think brands have to it'll be interesting to see the tolerance that people will end up having for the messages moving forward. I think the empathy, the need to like focus on sort of reconnecting, but I think there's also this element that people have some pandemic fatigue, and do they want to continue to be reminded everywhere they go of some of the limitations that we all feel. So I think that it'll be an interesting balance sort of moving forward of how responsive people want to be to what types of messages. So that's going to be pretty critical to really get under and make sure that everyone is understanding.
Got it. Right. Have you been impressed with any brand campaigns that you've seen during the pandemic? Some things that have stood out to you with regards to other brands?
It's a good question. I'm sure I have. And I think about just sort of the things that like I pay attention to more. I think some of the things that I just see. And so, there's things like retailers that I actively shop at that, used to be my quick escape on a Saturday that now become my like, oh, let me look at all these outfits that I want to buy. So I think I've seen a lot of really, pivots from a lot of retailers, I think, do some really interesting things. I think, there's been a lot of that. I think some of what people have done from as you think about like the delivery services and some of those kinds of things that people have just sort of pivoted to. And I think there's been a lot of really good work done, really across the board from a lot of brands that have really touched upon sort of the issues of the day, whether that be sort of how they're better servicing the needs of their customers to, a lot of really nice, empathy around sort of issues of the day that are happening.
Awesome. Well, I got some questions here. If you'd like, I'll field them from the audience and shoot them to you. The first one I have is, audio is inevitably a part of the creative conversation, especially when it comes to video. Any thoughts on best practices here?
Well, from an audio perspective, I guess I'm not quite clear on the question. Is like audio in terms of video or audio in and of itself?
Audio in and of itself. I mean, we have the ability to buy audio programmatically now as well too. So just curious if you're utilizing audio as a channel. And
we are, yes. I think we have found, and we have found that podcasts have been a really great way for us to reach our audiences, and really also be a way to really unpack and tell stories. There's really been some great content integrations that have happened that can really talk through complex issues in a really interesting way to an audience that is engaged. And so audio is definitely a very critical part of what we do. And I think it continues to go into that conversation of, you've got to make sure that you're following customers where they are. And so that sort of customer first approach is really critical. And we are finding that that's another area that you're seeing that increase in consumption.
Right. So audio for digital is an emerging platform to some degree over the last couple of years. How do you approach emerging media channels, and what do you do with regards to evaluating those channels as you're utilizing them?
So as you have emerging, you start testing. You look at sort of where the audience is, you start evaluating the partners that are in that space, and you test them, and you make sure that you've set up your measurement framework to understand what you're learning, and you just go do. A lot of times, they're not all, because you take a look and sometimes you see an emerging channel and you're like, ooh, that's really cool and that's so interesting, but business customers aren't there.
Right.
Doesn't mean the business customers won't be there one day, but they're not there right now, and so it's not the right fit. And then you have channels where you're like, oh my, this is happening, we're seeing this trend, I think there's an in, and you figure out how to go test it, and you test it.
Right. So here's another question from the audience. How soon do you bring in creative into your campaign planning, the team and the strategy?
So I like to think, and again, my partner in crime, John, we're hopefully attached at the hip as much as we can be. Really trying to make sure that when we sort of frame up the strategy, that if there's something new and interesting and different in play, that we're bringing each other in. If the creative team has an idea on something they want to go try, we try to go figure out how we can make it work, and vice versa. So there's definitely a connection point there, because those two things sort of have to go together. And as we start getting learnings from partners from the media perspective on things like best practices that they're starting to see, we want to make sure that our partners are part of that conversation, as they're always trying to make sure that we're staying on top of emerging trends from both a media and a creative perspective.
Got it. That's kind of touching upon workflow. And one of the other questions was, how has the pandemic affected your workflow? And do you think any of those changes will become permanent? I mean, you guys are a large organization, and
we are a large organization. And I will say the thing that I miss the most about being in the office is the random stopping someone in the hallway conversations of, hey, did you know? Or, oh, you might need to know this, or, those kinds of things. But honestly, I mean, technology and what technology has been able to do to connect people, like, I don't think we've seen any kind of lack of productivity, and it's just become a new way of collaborating. And I think everybody was in the same boat. And so we all jumped in at the same time, and, have figured that out.
Right.
You just pick up the phone, instead of walking in the hall, you pick up the phone and you call somebody, you send somebody a text, you end up needing to over communicate sometimes, but you just have to make do with what's going on.
And I think you mentioned that you guys are not back in the office yet. Is there plans to go back into the office? I know you have a large presence here in Dallas with a lot of corporate space.
Yeah, so the latest we've heard is that not to expect to go back into the office until sort of midsummer, potentially. But I certainly do think that there's been an opportunity that they've seen that, I think it's like most companies that, the need to be in the office is not necessarily fully there. And so I think we'll see a mix of, people who have to be in the office versus a mix of people who will become, more flexible and virtual workers. But, more to come on what that looks like and how that evolves. And we all might decide that we're tired of working from home and want to go see people. So
yes, for sure. Okay, let's end on a positive note. What is your hopeful or excited? What are you hopeful and excited for in 2021, both professionally and personally?
I think, I'm ready for, I'm an extremely glass half full person. I am extremely optimistic. And so, for me, I am really excited to see what we can sort of test and learn into sort of coming out of sort of the pandemic environment and into sort of things somewhat, whatever this next normal looks like. I'm really interested to see how that plays out, and sort of just the advancements, the innovation that we're going to see that's come out of this experience, both from an advertising perspective as well as just in general. And then, personally, I'm ready for, I have high hopes that we are on the tail end of this pandemic, and it will be a bright new day very soon.
I agree. Thank you so much, Megan Matlock, Vice President, Media Strategy at AT&T. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Paul.
This was great. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Paul. Bright new days ahead of us. Vaccine distribution in full swing. I think we are all ready. I'm up here in New Jersey. It's been a pretty chilly winter, and there's like a 60-degree day on the horizon. I may take the day off, frankly, and just walk outside all day. I don't know. We're all like ready for it. I think we're going to have the biggest travel season, this biggest boom we've ever seen vacation wise, right? It's going to be nuts in a couple months, but in a good way, I hope, to contrast with this year. But thank you again, both of you. This was fantastic. Really appreciate your insights. And we're going to keep this rolling. We have one more session for you guys today. So thank you again, Megan. Thank you, Paul. And we're going to bring up our final speakers. We have the wonderful Mike Swisher, the Director of Media Planning and Performance over at Method Products and SC Johnson. We have Jeff Zito, the Vice President of Sales now for Reel for the Midwest at Tremor Video. I got a little bit ahead of myself before when I brought up Paul, but called for Jeff. But now we got Mike, we got Jeff. How you guys doing?
Doing good. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good morning to our friends still on the West Coast, I guess. It might still be morning time for Mike. Can you hear us? Can you see us over there, Mike?
Hey, yeah, it is still late morning for us. How you guys doing?
We are great. Thank you guys both for being here. So again, Jeff, Mike, we are excited. We've had a fantastic program so far today. Mike, we've heard from your counterparts at Wells Fargo, at AT&T. We've talked about OTT and cookies and walled gardens and a really fantastic and ever-changing landscape of digital video, TV, and media. And we are thrilled to have you both here to finish out the day. So with that, Jeff, the virtual stage is yours, and I'll see you guys in a little bit.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is actually the first time I have ever used a virtual background, so getting used to it a little. Let me change my view to speaker view here. But no, thank you for joining us, Mike. It's great to see you again. I think that we've talked a lot over the last couple of weeks, and I think we both agree that connected TV has changed a ton over the last 10 years. I left the agency side 10 years and 2 months ago to go to a little connected TV startup called Yumi, and a decade later and 3 mergers later, here we are talking about a space that has just evolved a ton. You've been with Method for 3 years now. Can you tell us a little bit more about your roles and your responsibilities?
Yeah, sure. And I also came from the agency, from an agency background as well. So I think we probably grew up in a similar way. So I joined Method officially about 3 years ago, sort of on a more consultative basis, helping with media strategy. And about 2 years ago, I came on full time for, to really help guide media strategy across both Method and Mrs. Myers and create sort of more synergy across our brand initiatives, our e-commerce initiatives, and shopper marketing as well. And I was really the first media hire within the organization. And so I kind of had a lot of sort of fertile ground to play with and help sort of bring our organization into the future in terms of how we think about media, how we plan, how we structure our KPIs and our learning agenda. And so it's been a really fun challenge to sort of take us from the state that we were in before to this new sort of much more focused and strategic state that we're in now. And I think we're seeing some really great results as an impact of that.
Yeah, I can imagine these last 12 months have been pretty busy for you. It's funny, I was talking to some of my buddies at Boeing the other day, and marketing for Boeing is very different than marketing for Method right now. As just talk about your personal kind of consumption habits, right? Before we get into any sort of specifics, but how do you consume TV? Has it changed over the years?
As a millennial, I've been a cord never my entire life. I've never paid for any kind of subscription, cable or satellite service. And so I think the only way that my habits have changed is that I've probably added on more subscriptions. And so it kind of went from sort of the baseline Netflix to include a bunch of others, more premium channels, more content. And so I sort of have a wide variety of paid platforms that I access now. But in general, I think the habits have remained largely the same.
That's great. I mean, there's been so many different names, cord nevers, cord shavers over the years. It's been interesting to see, how they've adapted. Do you pay for any sort of TV? Are there any subscription services that you do pay for?
Yeah, just streaming. So, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, HBO, but all bought through my OTT device. So nothing, in sort of the traditional sense.
Who is your preferred OTT device?
I use Roku personally, but I have used others in the past, including Amazon Fire Sticks and Apple TVs as well. So Roku's been my preferred, and I use it across a few different TVs in my household.
Yeah, I mean, fragmentation, it's been mentioned several times today about the challenges of fragmentation. It's funny when I think about my household, right? In my office here, I have a Roku device. I've got an LG TV in my living room. I've got a Samsung TV upstairs, and I've got an Xbox downstairs. So it's always funny to think about the operational challenges that come along with fragmentation. We'll get into that a little bit later, but Terrence mentioned on his part earlier about how 73% of consumers are kind of willing to watch ad-supported TV for free if they don't have to pay for it. What is your kind of point of view there? Do you share that sentiment?
Personally, I would prefer to watch ad-free, but I think that's probably due to the fact that I'm a cord never, and I've never really had to necessarily deal with advertisements on my connected TV devices or platforms. But I think, a large proportion of the population grew up watching linear TV and maybe have more recently made the switch. And so it's a more natural environment for them. And I think consumers inherently are pretty price sensitive. And so, there's only so many different subscriptions that consumers are probably willing to pay for. And if they can start to access additional great original content through, advertising on new streaming platforms, then I think that they'll be more than willing to do that because it's just part of their behavior that they've become accustomed to.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how these skinny bundles suddenly stack up, right? I think that we did a study and showed the average cable cost is $107 a month, but then you start adding in the Slings or the Hulus or the AT&Ts, and then you throw in the Disney Plus and the HBO Now, and then I think that we've seen like the regular skinny bundle averages is $60 now, plus what you're paying for the internet. So things can change relatively quickly. And, I just heard something the other day. I heard for the first time called a rundle. It's going to be having like ESPN and Disney Plus and Hulu and like a Disney Parks Pass all under one payment per month. So I don't know if that phrase is officially been coined yet, but that's kind of floating around. It'd be interesting to see as people, for the same reason fragmentation of devices is a challenge, fragmentation of all these different fees is a challenge, like making sure that you're paying for what you're using. That's the ultimate, value prop here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't heard the rundle before, but I'm sure that there'll be a lot more terms coined in the near future. I think we're still kind of early innings in this future of TV, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I think, we've seen a lot of acquisitions and consolidation just starting to happen. And I think that, the incumbent players in linear TV are going to have to evolve and adapt to survive. And I think that we're starting to see the beginnings of what that looks like. And I think ultimately, it'll be better for the consumer, but I think there's still a lot of things that need to be figured out in terms of how this actually comes to play in the long term.
Absolutely. I think I heard earlier that the Paramount is launching today. They can add one more subscription service that we check out here. Hopefully we can get a couple months free with maybe a new cell phone sign up. Let's take a step back for a second and talk about connected TV, right? Video, connected TV, I'm sure has been an important part of your marketing mix over the years. Can you tell us more about that, how that's changed over the years?
Yeah, I think we've always looked at connected TV as sort of a lower baseline, lower hurdle channel to get into if we want to get on the big screen in people's homes. I think linear requires a pretty sizable investment to be able to do it well, in terms of making sure that you're reaching the right reach and frequency against your target audience. And the beauty of connected TV is that you're able to be more targeted, and in doing so you can enter with less budget and still have an impact on your audience by managing your budget and reach and frequency together in a way that you couldn't do in linear. And so for Method and Mrs. Myers, when our brands are growing rapidly, and 5 years ago they looked a lot different than they do today, and it allowed us an early entry point into this space where we might not have been able to afford it to compete with sort of the larger incumbent mass brands that we compete against. And so it's always been a part of our strategy. I think in the past, scale has been an issue, cost has been a little bit prohibitive, and I think that's mostly due to the supply. Not that there's not a lot of supply of content out there for consumers, but in terms of what is ad supported, back in the earlier days, there was very little, right? And because there's a lot of interest from brands and demand from brands, you saw those CPMs go up, exponentially higher than you would on linear TV even. And I think as more and more players come into the space and provide ad supported products, that's pulling the price down and getting it closer to parity with linear. And so I'm excited about that because I think it's just going to open the doors to a lot more brands to play there and sort of even the playing field a bit. When you think about, challenger brands like ours versus some of the mass brands out there, this is going to be good for us, for some of the smaller brands that are out there.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's funny to think back, when we were first selling connected TV back in 2011, it was basically a small ad unit, the equivalent of a display ad on the largest screen in the house. If you clicked on it, it got bigger. But you know what? It was new. It was kind of sexy. BlackBerry, I remember, jumped all over. It's like, hey, we're pushing innovation here. It's fascinating to see how much things have changed. You can deep link now. You can go to specific programming. I read a stat the other day that said, the Disney Pluses, the Netflix of the world, paid the device manufacturers $240 million last year just for placements, just for those buttons on the remotes, just to try to shorten the link to improve the user experience. It's been funny to watch LG over the years strategically place their ads by following the user experience, just to try to simplify things and make things easier for them. One of the challenges, us both being ex-agency personnel, silos, right? Having one team playing your TV and another team playing your digital and another team potentially playing your mobile. How have you kind of overcame that or, fought that over the years?
Yeah, I think historically, I've kind of always looked at it as more of an integrated approach. We have leaned much more heavily into digital, and that makes it a little bit easier because you don't necessarily need a separate TV or print team to help supplement your buy and to be the experts in that space. And so when I think about planning, when I think about video in general, for me, it's about a 360 video plan. And that comes to life across a variety of places, whether that's through FEPs, whether it's through streaming, whether it's desktop or mobile. It's really about making sure that you're sort of keeping your strategy consistent across whatever touch point you're talking about, and that you're measuring your success in a similar way as you can as well, so that you're able to prioritize your budgets that perform the best and optimize your spends in future flights. And so I've always kind of looked at it holistically. I think there have been challenges with tracking and frequency management on CTV, and those are starting to go away as well. And so I think, as time goes on and the technology gets better and more advanced, it's just going to become easier to plan more holistically and measure more holistically as well.
Yes, I mean, how you evaluate video has changed over the years, right? You know, we used to go from clicks and VCRs to now maybe a deeper level of attribution. Have you seen success with any specific attribution methods or partners?
Yeah, from a sort of a higher level perspective, we like to work with partners that can help us understand the incremental impact each channel has on our KPIs. So thinking of someone like a Nielsen TMR, it can sort of isolate the various channels within our mix and tell us which ones drove the highest relative impact to each other. And that'll help us optimize our marketing mix. I think there's also some sort of more diagnostic tools out there that can help us understand, are people actually watching our ads? And so I'm thinking of mode and, metrics like audio, visual, and complete. So that means that they have, if they're on their computer, their window's up, the volume's up, and they actually were on that window when the video ended. And so that's just sort of a diagnostic measure of engagement that will help you understand, did someone actually see your ad or not? Just because it served an impression doesn't mean that you had eyeballs. And so I think there's a lot of ways that you can measure success. And I think we're starting to get better about it. In terms of sort of performance marketing, it's not something that we usually necessarily include in our mix because the costs have been just so prohibitive in terms of being able to drive efficiency in sales, especially for lower cost products like the ones that we sell. So we see it more as a brand play.
Yeah. I mean, Mrs. Myers and Method is going on, what, 20 years old by now? My wife is a brand loyalist. Use your products. You've been there for 3 impactful years. It was mentioned earlier on the call, there's a difference between being a product and being a brand. How would you guys say you've built your brand over the last several years?
I think both Method and Mrs. Myers have strong brands, and our brands have really grown and gotten to where they are today on the strength of our products. And, they're both differentiated in the space, whether it be through fragrance or design, or even just sort of brand values that come from our founder stories that are unique to us. But, at the end of the day, I think we have room to grow in terms of our emotional connection with our consumers. When we think about sort of the sustainable, eco-friendly, mission-driven space that we play in, I think consumers are becoming more and more scrutinizing of the brands that they purchase and voting with their wallets. And so making sure that it's not just sitting in the background like it kind of has in the past. We want to bring those values to the forefront because they are true to who we are, and they come to life in everything we do, from the way that we manufacture our products and distribute them to the way that we treat our people and the way that we try to lead the industry with our innovation. And I think, the time has just become very ripe for us to actually start leading with that messaging versus the differentiation in the products themselves, which of course we'll still continue to do. But I think a values-driven approach is I think we're going to see a big shift in the marketplace in terms of how brands come to life and how they talk to consumers, because consumers do seem to care more about that more recently than they have in the past.
Yeah, I mean, just circling back to fragmentation, right? I think that it's easy to think about how challenging fragmentation can be. But when you break it down to almost mobile, right? Connected TV, unlike mobile, where there's either iOS or Android, has so many different operating systems, right? LG, Samsung, Amazon, Apple, Roku, that just scratches the surface. There's, a handful, maybe 2 handfuls of others. Operationally, that's a pretty big challenge to create the right set of creatives for the right screen and make sure you're trafficking the right tags with the right partners. How do you guys handle the kind of operational challenges of connected TV?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's been pretty tough, right? You have all these different providers or streaming content services, and it's really hard to get line of sight into whether or not you have the same consumers consuming content on all of them. And so managing frequency for a large campaign is very difficult. I think with sort of the rise of programmatic connected TV, which until recently was pretty limited in scale, is going to be a huge boon to our ability to be able to manage frequency and measurement across multiple devices, using sort of some kind of persistent identifier across all these different channels. That's not really possible in real time, but I think we can look back and understand a little bit better how our campaign actually delivered in terms of frequency across channels. And I'm hopeful that in the not too distant future, we'll be able to do it a little bit more real time so that we can make our budgets more efficient. But I think certainly we can start to get a clearer picture of who our consumers are and how they're consuming using, CDP technology, potentially partner with someone like a LiveRamp. I saw Roku just had a partnership with Nielsen that came to light. I think that's a big unlock as well. And so I think there's ways we can get at it. None of them are perfect, but I think it's starting to come to a place where we can have more confidence in our ability to manage those campaign buys across different platforms.
Yeah, I mean, the promise of programmatic, right, was efficiency, effectiveness, being able to control it all under kind of one umbrella. I think we've seen that range true in some cases. In other cases, in the more complex products, we continue to run managed service opportunity versus programmatic. Can you speak at all between, how you decide to go with either like a managed service provider or a programmatic partner, or how those, direct partnerships work?
Yeah, I think part of it comes down to cost. I think that's probably the biggest factor for us, and also, I guess, consistency in terms of our approach across multiple channels. So yes, we can do a direct buy with someone like Hulu, and we've definitely done that in the past because, typically you get access to better inventory, and so if you're going for a premium and guaranteed, then that has been the way to do that. But I think recently that's changing a bit, where we can actually get guarantees in programmatic spaces through, private marketplace deals and things of that nature. And then we can also think about it more holistically in part of our total digital video strategy, including desktop and mobile and FUPs and YouTube and everything else. And so I think nowadays it makes less sense to go direct. The benefits don't seem to outweigh the benefits of doing it in the alternate way. And so I don't really see a future where we go direct anymore. I think for us, we're going to sort of lean into the evolution of the space and typically buy more programmatically as much as we can.
Yeah, it's the coin, hands on keyboards is something that has spread a lot over the years. And it's funny how many different people can now have their hands on the keyboards at one time. The pandemic has impacted brands differently, right? We talked a little bit earlier about, your brand versus a Boeing. Have you seen marketers try new tactics, or do you see them kind of gravitating to the tried and true things that have worked over the years?
I think different channels have been impacted in different ways due to COVID. I think you have sort of the obvious losers in the space, like out of home. When people stopped moving around, people stopped buying out of home because they weren't getting the same eyeballs. I think this is going to cause a shift in the way that people think about out of home and buy it. And I think it'll become more opportunistic, more digitally focused. How can you actually think about sort of that one-to-one versus that one-to-many that has historically been the way that people buy out of home? And then I think other channels, especially thinking about TV, has been a huge beneficiary. I think I saw a stat that TV consumption has doubled or something like that in the last year as people have been home more. And so, both linear, I think, benefited, but I think probably more so digital and sort of OTT CTV has benefited as people have had more time to explore the content options out there. And there's been so many sort of like meme content series and just sort of pop culture that's sort of been born in this streaming environment that I think is only going to lead to continued growth and excitement around the space.
Yeah, I mean, the one-to-one targeting, right? I think that's the big promise of, mass personalization at scale. That's oftentimes what we get asked to do, right? As marketers get savvier, as technology improves, as capabilities increase, people want to hit mass personalization at scale. Have you guys found any success doing that? Have you been able to see success in the, call it the dynamic creative optimization field?
Yeah, I think there's a balance that needs to be struck between sort of this personalization at scale, this hyper-targeted approach versus broad reach campaigns through something like linear TV, where you're getting a lot of eyeballs all at once, right? I think there's still a benefit to that approach, and it depends on your brand and your category and who your target audience is, of course. When you're thinking about more niche brands that are potentially more specialized, then you stand to benefit a lot from becoming more targeted and more personalized, and making sure that your messaging is actually right for the consumer in that moment versus getting mass exposure across a channel against a certain demo index. As far as personalization specifically goes, I think, we recently launched direct consumer for both Method and Mrs. Myers. They're still sort of small burgeoning businesses for us, but we're very excited about the prospect of acquiring more first party data just to make our advertising in general more sophisticated. And two, I think personalization is something that we have our eye on and something that we hope to bring to life, not just in our lifecycle marketing, but also in our website experiences and also our media. So how do we actually take advantage of the fact that we have the opportunity to use data for this more targeted, personalized approach in a way that will be impactful to consumers and help us nurture our relationship with them long term. And so, we're kind of just scratching the surface of that right now, but it's something that we're definitely looking at and excited about activating.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like, easier said than done, right? How does a brand do so? How does a brand tell their story across all of these different screens? Is there a silver bullet for that?
I don't think there's a silver bullet. I do think that the way that brands approach it in general is changing. I think the move away from more traditional channels like TV is a good sort of proof point for that, where you had one message for the masses. And now we think about making sure that our creative is optimized for each platform. And that could be in sort of the format, in the visuals, in the messaging, in the experience, right? And so we think, we'll have a consistent point of view that we want to communicate, but the way that we actually bring that to consumers will be different across different channels, depending on, what they're doing, what kind of content they're consuming, what time of day it is, and so on, so that it's the most relevant for them and also the most valuable for them. I think we have a duty as marketers to not only drive sales, but I think to make our advertising more valuable to our consumers, because if we do that right, then I think we'll actually acquire consumers for the long term versus, suffer from this leaky bucket that I think has long been a problem, especially for CPG brands like ours in high consumption categories.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, every time I can get an ad that's tailored to me, my engagement is, significantly increased. And I can also tell when, there's something that is not tailored to me, and I definitely just tune out. So it's a constant challenge that I think all of us in the space are trying to figure out solutions to. We're 3 months into 2021 here. As you look to the second half of 2021 and hopefully to the tail end of the pandemic, are there reasons to be hopeful as a marketer?
Yeah, I think there are definitely reasons to be hopeful. I feel like, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I've heard some kind of funny notions about what life is going to look like post-pandemic and sort of this revenge living phenomenon of all this pent-up desire for life that has been kind of put on hold due to COVID. And I think that's going to lead to a lot of excitement in the space. And I think, increased consumer spending. And I think consumers are also going to have a new perspective on what they care about. And I think, I talked a little bit about voting with your wallet before. I think we've had a lot of time to sort of stew over a lot of the bad things in our world right now, whether it be political unrest or environmental fears and things of that nature. And I think people have started to take notice, and I think that we'll see a little bit more activism, and that'll continue. And I think as brands, as long as we can be authentic to ourselves and find shared values with our consumers, that we can be really successful in the long term, because consumers are going to be so receptive to it. So brands in the space like ours that are built on their values, I think will stand to benefit a lot. So I'm definitely excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, priorities are different. I think that people have good experiences and bad experiences, and I can just, without naming names, like I've had a couple of poor experiences at retailers over the last several months that have made me reevaluate how I continue to buy goods and services, right? Certain providers make it easier than others. And if you have the opportunity to vote with your wallet, as you said, like a lot of people are going to take that choice. Let's see here. What bonus questions do we have here? So, has there been a particular brand that's stood out to you with having an interesting or impressive, marketing campaign?
One that's top of mind for me right now is Frida. don't know if you're familiar with the brand. It's a baby brand, baby care brand, and also maternity brand. They recently launched a campaign that was it was pretty controversial, and I think it was very controversial, but in a good way. It was very empowering, I think, to mothers, specifically focused around breastfeeding and sort of the negative stigma that exists in our culture around it, and bringing it to the forefront of the conversation. I think it was definitely true to Frida as a brand, and I think that consumers who care about that, were definitely very drawn to it and felt very connected to it. And so, when I think about being more values driven in our approach, that to me is a shining example of how you can actually lead with your values and find the consumers that connect to it, and take those risks. Because if you take a calculated risk based on being true to yourself and who your brand is, then the consumers that you're looking for are going to be attracted to you and drawn to you. And I think that's going to establish these long-term relationships that are going to be necessary for brands like ours to succeed in the long term.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Gabby mentioned it earlier during the creative session of QR codes, right? I think it was funny thinking back to CES. I think it was CES 2014 when QR codes on connected TV became first a big thing, but it was arguably 6 years too early. Now post-pandemic or midway through the pandemic or 3/4 through the pandemic, I think anyone who's gone out to eat at a restaurant that's been available to is now used to using their phone for a QR code, right? It's easy. I forget the term that Gabby used earlier, but you don't need a separate device. You can just turn your camera on and scan. Have you guys seen any success in messaging with Myers or Method in terms of kind of using QR codes?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. My wife's really tired of me making jokes about QR codes having their day due to the pandemic. But yeah, QR codes are something that we're exploring as well. I think, there are some platforms that I think leverage it well. So you have your sort of traditional QR code approach, which is just, using your phone to pull up a browser window and go to a website landing page. And then there are others that are a little bit more creative, and that's kind of where we're leaning in, thinking about places like Snapchat, where you can create sort of an engaging experience for consumers at shelf using things like augmented reality to just make it fun and to allow consumers to connect with your brand in a way that's more significant and deeper than just seeing your product on shelf, picking it up, looking at the ingredients, and so on. So I think we'll continue to see that space develop and thrive, and I don't think that's going away. And we're excited for other social platforms to figure out ways to incorporate that into their offering, because I think consumers are eager to experience products in new ways. And I think, we're excited to see where that takes us. But we're just dipping our toes in there as well.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I mean, I can tell you how many RFPs we've received that mention QR codes over the last 90 days. Quite a few of them, so you're on the right path. Let's take a couple questions from the audience here. They're starting to come in here. The first one is, I've seen a few new Method products recently. Any new products you can share?
Well, we just launched a new men's grooming line in our personal care category. So we've got beard oil, face wash, face lotion, and a couple others that I'm forgetting right now. But personal care has actually been a big focus area for us in recent years. And so we have both a men's line as well as what we call an experiential line, which is more unisex in nature. And it spans everything from body wash to bar soap, shampoo, and there's more and more products in the pipeline that will be coming out soon. All of those will be actually available on our direct-to-consumer site, methodmen.com for now, and it'll soon be methodproducts.com, which will include both the experiential and the men's line. So I'm excited about those. Those have been really fun to market, and personally, I just love all the products in the men's line too. Use them all at home. And then, we have some other, we always have sort of an innovation pipeline. I would say COVID kind of derailed it a bit because we had to reprioritize based on sort of the large amount of demand that was unforeseen. But, we're getting back on track, and, there's some exciting stuff coming out a little bit later this year that I'm, I can't share now, but it'll definitely be sort of a very different space for us to play in. I hope it'll sort of drive some substantial change in our industry in ways that we've done in the past. And yeah, I wish I could share more, but that's about all I can talk about right now.
Yeah, methodman.com. I may or may not know an influencer that might be interested in helping you there. let's get another question here. Your Method body wash was such a huge success on TikTok. How'd you leverage that?
Yeah, so TikTok is actually a new platform for us. And we're actually launching our first campaign there with influencers as well as some paid media. But, our brands, they typically get a lot of love on social media, and different platforms seem to perform better for different brands. But TikTok in particular has been super successful for Method, with cleaning in sort of the UK, European region, and then with personal care in the US. We have a lot of love within that user base for these products. And I think, from what I've seen, I'm not a huge TikTok user, but personal care products seem to be pretty big on TikTok. You see a lot of brands that kind of go viral and that are, big fan favorites of the audience there. We had one organic video recently that got millions and millions of views, and it was just someone holding up the product and talking about how much they loved it. And so I think we see a huge opportunity to activate there and to show up where our consumers are. And we're always evolving our strategies to make sure that we're doing that in the best way possible, because we know that the industry is changing, our consumers are changing, and we need to make sure that as a smaller brand that is hopefully more nimble, we can continue to evolve and do it in real time in a way that will be impactful and drive our strategy.
Yeah, I can't think of the name of the cheese right now, but there's a certain cheese that's just like completely sold out because of one viral TikTok video, and you can't even find it anywhere. Another question here. How soon do you bring creative into your campaign planning?
How soon do we bring what? Sorry, I missed that.
Feta cheese. There it is, Maddie. Feta cheese is the cheese that's sold out everywhere. How soon do you bring creative into your campaign planning, kind of both the team and thinking about the strategy?
Yeah, I think ideally we bring creative in early, and we actually create a lot of connection points between media and creative, so that we might take sort of the creative platform big idea, and then in terms of how we actually bring that to life in the best ways possible, we need the media strategy to help guide that and dictate it in some senses, so that, as I mentioned before, we optimize our creative for the platform to make sure that we're showing up in ways that consumers expect and want. And without creating those touch points throughout the process, it's really hard to make sure that you're not just trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, right? What you use for a digital banner versus what you use for streaming video versus what you put on TikTok, they shouldn't look the same. I think that they should have an underlying connected theme that sort of brings everything together in a cohesive way. But we need to make sure that it's contextually relevant for the environment. It has to be the right messaging, the right ad, or else it's just not going to be as effective. And so, we're actually in the process of getting a new campaign ready for a Method brand launch that's coming up in the spring and May time period. And we have a really strong relationship with our creative team, and we have a really strong relationship with our media team. And there's been some good collaboration that's already happened, and we expect that to continue as we sort of flesh out what the strategy looks like.
Yeah, it's been interesting being highly involved in the what we call data-driven creative. How long that process can take, it can be quite a long time from the initial visualization of what you want to achieve to actually being able to break it down and make it happen. Another question here, which kind of already answered once, but are there any brands in market whose campaigns you've been impressed by in this past year? I know you mentioned the one. Any other ones out there that you've been like, hell of a campaign?
I think we talked about this the other day, but I just love Geico's commercials. I think that they have such a unique space they've taken in the market, and they just own it. That humor that they bring to a pretty boring product category and do it well time and time again. I'm just amazed by them sometimes. It's the way that they're able to just constantly reinvent themselves in the way that they talk to consumers. So I love what they do. I thought they had a hilarious commercial at the Super Bowl, and I'm always excited to see what they come out with next.
Which brand was that?
Geico.
Yeah, the swoop there it is. Like every time I hear it, like I find myself just kind of like jamming out to it. And then I thought the Cheetos one was pretty good during the Super Bowl too, with Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher, and of course, who can forget Shaggy? But those are a couple of the ones that I've noticed too.
Yeah, that was a throwback. That was great.
if you grew up with, Shaggy, then that one, I mean, like I did, right? Like that it spoke to you, right? I think that there's a lot going for the nostalgia play with some of those Super Bowl ads for sure.
Definitely.
David, I think that's those are all of our questions, unless anybody else has anything else they want to ask now. But Mike Swisher, methodman.com coming out soon. Thank you for your time. You answered some great questions there, David. How can I hand it back over to you?
No, this was great, guys. And Mike, I wanted to say, yeah, the Frida ad I thought was fantastic. It was covered in the New York Times, and it was interesting because of the imagery shown, which made it through NBC. It was the first time, they depicted a woman, breastfeeding on national television like that during the awards. But then LinkedIn, I guess, hadn't updated their censors or their protocols for inappropriate content. So people were sharing the articles about the ad, on LinkedIn, and they kept getting flagged for inappropriate content. So I just thought that was, interesting, but no, it was fantastic. I love the feta cheese thing. I still haven't tried it, but I mean, like I got it now, right? If I can find some, but this was awesome, guys. I love it. Mike, thank you. Jeff, thank you. This was great. Really appreciate our friends at Tremor, hosting and presenting today. And Mike, and to all of our speakers, Megan and Allison and everybody else who joined us. This was fantastic. So I'll let you guys go. Thank you to everybody who tuned in, and we hope to see you next week for our Women in Marketing Summit. So we will see you there. And Mike, Jeff, we'll have you guys back again soon.
Thanks so much. Take care.
All right. Take care, everybody. And it's been a great program. So thanks again. We'll see you back here virtually.